contributions. Congratulations. We'll grab his award here in a minute. And Jim Gartland is in the back of the room. Jim Gartland has devoted his career to improving our quality and quantity of data that forms the basis for our fisheries management decisions. Since 2001, he served as a program manager for the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences Multi-Species Fisheries Research Program. The core of the program includes 2 large-scale fishery-independent trawl surveys, ChessMap and NEMAP, and an accompanying laboratory program with Jim overseeing all aspects of both surveys and the post-cruise laboratory processing of samples. Both surveys have provided key data used in several stock assessments of the Commission-managed species, including croaker, Atlantic menhaden, black drum, bluefish, river herring, scup, spiny dogfish, spot, summer flounder, and weakfish. Further, Jim led ChessMap's collection of tissue samples from Atlantic striped bass has helped to monitor the prevalence of mycobacteriosis. This effort has resulted in a published manuscript documenting mycobacteriosis-associated mortality in striped bass. The first documented case of mortality caused by a chronic case of disease in wild finfish population. The value of these surveys and the data that they produce, the Commission can only grow as time series associated with these survey designs lengthen. The success of these surveys and enhanced support of the Commission's scientific and management activities is directly due to Jim's outstanding efforts. He's a remarkable scientist whose energy, enthusiasm, and commitment to excellence are unparalleled. For all those reasons, I'd like to present the 2013 Annual Award of Excellence in Scientific Technical Advisory Efforts to Jim Gartland. Congratulations, Jim.
I don't know, I guess, well, thank you very much to the Commission and to my colleagues through all years of joy of working together. And we are a community, and we're strong not only as a community, as a group of people, all for one and one for all. And, well, of course, I'm surprised. Why me? But the only logical explanation that I see is nobody wanted to get a 2013. But thank you very much, and we'll do our best for the next 10, 20 years or so.
Along the same lines, I mean, I'm not a good speaker here, but I just wanted to say thank you guys all very much. I certainly do appreciate all the opportunities I've had to work with you guys and to build these programs. And I certainly look forward to continuing to build them and continuing to contribute in every way that we can over the next, I think I still have 35 years left. So hopefully I'll be here 35 years from now. But anyway, thank you guys very much.
Well, thanks, Bob. It's always one of the great things about ASMFC is that we do pause occasionally to recognize some of the accomplishments and the great people that are involved in the management process along the coast. So congratulations, Alexi and Jim. So getting to the Striped Bass Management Board meeting, everybody should have an agenda. Just carefully looking at the agenda, we got a couple major topics today, being the stock assessment review, discuss whether or not there needs to be a management response to those, and the compliance reports. Does anybody have any comments or additions to the agenda? All right, seeing none, the agenda will stand approved. We also have, you should have received the proceedings for the August 2013 Striped Bass Board meeting. Are there any comments to those proceedings? All right, seeing none, those will stand approved as well. We're at the public comment period. Nobody has signed up from the public, but I will ask, does anybody in the public want to make a comment for items that are not on the agenda at this time? All right, moving forward. So we're going to get through by lunchtime. So moving right into agenda item number 4 is the Striped Bass Stock Assessment Report. And this is going to be, I think, a tag team with Gary Nelson and Alexi. Hand it over to Gary at this time.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to just take you through some of the things that we did this time for the benchmark stock assessment. And we made some changes to the model and to the data sets that we've used in the past. So I'll just review those and review some of the results. For the benchmark assessment, we had done some work where we, as you'll see in the document, we tried to increase some of the model complexity to account for some differences we thought were occurring due to selectivity differences between like Chesapeake Bay and the coast. And so we had to go back and try to split the historical data into regions. And when we did that, there was actually some mistakes that had been made that we corrected. From 2004 to 2012, the MRIP had re-estimated all the recreational estimates, so we had to change and update all the information with those new changes. So the time series that's actually available now is different from the one that's been available in the past. For this assessment, we also, for the rec data, the way we calculate dead releases, we actually went with a new release mortality estimate of 0.09, which is from the Diodati and Richards 96 paper. We had originally used 0.08, and that was the preliminary estimate of the Diodati and Richards paper that we just never changed. So we did some significant updates this time. Commercial landings data all came from the states. All the data that we used in the benchmark were preliminary, and there were some changes, and I'll show you some of the differences in the landings between the benchmark and then we used in the final update. Of course, we calculate the commercial discards the same way, although we had to re-estimate all the discards, commercial discards, back to 2004 because of the changes in the MRIP estimates. And we also updated the release mortality for hook and line to 0.09 instead of using 0.08. And then we did some of the same things that we normally do, is the state proportion that catches in the age classes using scales. And again, the benchmark used preliminary data for 2012, and the update, which I believe everyone has, is using the final 2012 data. And I'll show you some of the changes that occurred. This graph just shows the percent changes in the harvest. I wish I had a pointer. The harvest. Oh, I can't do that. Do you have a pointer? Okay. It's hard to see. There's in the upper left-hand corner is the percent change between the final and the preliminary data. The yellow is the estimate of for releases, and then the red is for harvest. You can see there were not a lot of great changes between the preliminary and the final, except for Maryland, which jumped up about 15%. You can see that big red bar. The commercial harvest only changed a little bit. New York was the only one that changed their final estimates. And then the commercial discards, because of the changes in MRIP and an error that was made, the commercial discards increased between half to about 2.5%. Okay. This just shows the summary of the landings in metric tons by that were landed by the commercial fishery, and then also the recreational fishery, which is in the red. You can see that the commercial landings have been pretty much stable since 1998 or so, and the red line being the recreational harvest peaked about 2006, has been variable but declining since. And this slide just shows the coastwide removals broken down by mortality sources. The blue here is our estimates of the recreational dead releases. The red is the recreational harvest. Black is the commercial discards, and the yellow is the commercial harvest. You can see that most of the removals made up of the recreational dead and recreational harvest fishes, and that's about 55% of the removals by the recreational fishery. As I mentioned before, this time around, for this assessment, we actually split and modeled regional data because we're trying to improve the selectivity estimates. There is a big difference in selectivity between Chesapeake Bay and the coast. So we modeled, we essentially modeled the data as fleets being, having Chesapeake Bay as a fleet, and then the coast as a fleet. And because we couldn't split out the commercial discards into regions prior to 2003 data, for the 2003 and prior data, we had to model that as a separate fleet. And you can see this slide just shows the recreational discards in dark blue, the coast in gray, and the Chesapeake Bay numbers in red. So this, as you can see, the coast is harvesting a lot more than Chesapeake Bay. Oh. Okay, good. Thank you. Also, the total, you can see the total trend here has been declining since about 2006. So I'm going to just show you some of the trends that have occurred in the harvest data from the MRIP estimates. This slide shows 3 states, Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire. Maine is in the red, Massachusetts in yellow, and New Hampshire's in blue. You can see for Maine, catches harvest has declined since about 2007 or so. It's been pretty low since. Massachusetts has been bounced around, went down a bit in 2011, has bounced back up in 2012. New Hampshire jumped up in 2011, is back down, but it's been pretty variable. But it's had low catches during the 2007 to 2009 period. This slide is showing the harvest for New York, which is in red, Rhode Island in yellow, and Connecticut in blue. New York here has been increasing, but kind of variable the last few years, and did decline in 2012. Rhode Island been bouncing around till about 2007, and so went down a bit and has been at a lower level. And then Connecticut peaked around 2006 and has declined, but it's been variable the last few years. These states of New Jersey, which is in red, Maryland in blue, and Delaware in yellow. New Jersey did decline at about after 2006, increased a little bit, but dropped down in 2012. Maryland peaked in about 2008, has declined a little bit, and dropped in 2012. And Delaware had declined after 2008, I think, and has increased a little bit in 2012. And then for Virginia and North Carolina, Virginia harvest had declined significantly since about 2006. So hasn't North Carolina, but starting back in 2005. And they increased a little bit in the last few years. And then in 2012, there was no recreational harvest in North Carolina, according to MRIP. So I'm going to show you just the release numbers too. These tend to be the smaller fish because of the size regulations. Again, Maine is in red, Massachusetts in blue, New Hampshire in yellow. You can see around 2005, 2006, all 3 states, the number of released fish have dropped significantly and is still pretty low in 2012. For Connecticut in the blue, they've also dropped significantly. Rhode Island, they started about 2000, I don't know what that year is, 2006 I think, and they also show the same trend. And then New York, that dropped a bit, actually dropped a lot from 2011 to 2012. And then New Jersey, again, the same trend. About 2006 was the peak, and the releases have dropped down to lowest point. Well, not the lowest point, but low in 2012. Maryland also, although they saw an uptick in 2012, which I think is the 2011 year class. Then Delaware peaked about 2008 or so, has been low, and went up a little bit in the last few years. And then Virginia, again, peaked in 2007 or so, and has been low since then. North Carolina, basically the same trend as their harvest. There was essentially no releases in 2012 estimated by the MRIP program. This slide just shows you the age composition of the total removals, and all I did here was just highlight some of the strong year classes from Chesapeake Bay. And if you look at this last graph in 2012, essentially we haven't had any really strong year classes indicated in the catch as measured by the comparing it to the young of the year index from Maryland. In 2012, the peak age in the catch was about age 5. Okay, as I mentioned before, we split the data out this time into regions, Chesapeake Bay and then the coast. And this just shows the age composition over time going from 1982 up to 2012. And you can see how the progression of the age structure has occurred over time, where the larger fish were making up were comprising the total catches in Chesapeake Bay in the last decade or so. The composition has been increasing. The coast has been a bit variable. We've always caught large fish, but if you can look down here at the bottom, you can see these ages filling in as time has occurred. So the age structure on the coast has been expanding essentially over time. And this just shows the age structure for the commercial discards. Commercial discards are made up of a lot of discards from Chesapeake Bay, so this looks very similar to Chesapeake Bay. Smaller fish are being discarded, but over time, some of the larger and older fish are being discarded also. Okay, just to update on some of the indices this time around. Historically, we have dropped. We used to have several fisheries-dependent indices. Massachusetts, we used to develop a commercial CPU index, but since 2008 or so, we've dropped it because we determined that it's really not reflective of abundance. It was more of availability of the fish. This time around, we dropped the Connecticut recreational CPUE because the new person who does it hasn't been able to duplicate the index that was done in the past, and we believe that there was some double counting since some of the MERF stuff was used to develop index, so we got rid of that. But this time around, we also included the Virginia pound net index, which we had originally dropped back in 2007, I think. And BIMS had submitted a paper to get us to reinstitute that, so the committee had decided to include that in the assessment this time. So overall, there's essentially 14 indices included. We have index we developed from the MRIP data, Connecticut trawl survey. We have the NIMS trawl survey, but that we only use up to 2008 because they changed their vessel and they no longer sample the inshore strata where they used to catch striped bass, so that ends in 2008. New Jersey trawl survey, the New York Ocean Hull survey, which ended in 2006, if I remember correctly, and we still include that, but there are no data after 2006. We have a Delaware electrofishing survey, which is done in the Delaware River, the New York Young of the Year survey, New York Western Long Island Sound Age 1 survey, New Jersey Young of the Year, Virginia Young of the Year, Maryland Young of the Year and Age 1 survey. We have a spawning stock index from the Maryland Gillnet survey, and then we also include now the Virginia PoundNet survey. And this just shows some of the trends. On the left here are the fisheries-dependent indices here. This should be over here. This is the MRIP index showing how this index peaked about 2000, has been declining and bouncing, but after about 2006 it's been going down. Virginia PoundNet has been variable. This is the New York Ocean Hull survey. Again, it only goes out to 2006. Connecticut trawl survey has been showing a decline. New Jersey trawl had shown a decline also last few years, and then a bump up in 2012. The Delaware electrofishing survey has been kind of variable, but down since the beginning of the time series. The Maryland Gillnet index, which is a measure of spawning stock biomass, has been variable but slightly down over time. And then this last index is the NIMS trawl survey, which ended in 2008. And then the Young of the Years, I know these are messy, but things to point out. This is the Maryland Young of the Year index showing the very low 2012 value with a high 2011. Also seen in Virginia, right there, that's 2011, 2012. And then New York Young of the Year, New Jersey has been down a bit in 2012. New York peaked in 2011, it's been down a bit. So some general patterns. Okay, for the modeling, we use the same type of model. It's a forward projecting statistical catch at age. We essentially estimate recruitment in age 1 in each year, the fully recruited fishing mortality. We have selectivity patterns that we estimate in 4 regulatory periods because regulations have changed, and we estimate all the coefficients for the indices that are used to tune the model, and also selectivity for each of the surveys that had age composition. And again, we split the data into fleets. Chesapeake Bay, the coast commercial discard. This improved the estimates of selectivity, and it provided a partial F they could just add together to get the total. This time around, we actually used an age-specific natural mortality instead of just assuming a constant 0.15. We developed a relationship between age and natural mortality that we got from literature and also tagging data, estimates of natural mortality. And so at age 1, we had an estimate of 1.13, and then from age 7 and on, it's still 0.15. And we're presenting now, in these slides I'll show you, just fully recruited fishing mortality instead of the old average F at ages 8 to 11, since we split the data up into fleets. Stop me if you have any questions. This slide just shows the estimates of fully recruited F for the different regions. Let's see, down at the bottom here is the F for the commercial discards. This is the F for Chesapeake Bay. This is the F for the coast, and then this is the total. You can't really sum these up because the fully recruited F is different between the bay and the coast because of the selectivity pattern, but if you can sum the fishing mortality at age across the areas to get the total, and this is what the total is, and the peak and the total fully recruited F. So this is the pattern. The estimate in 2012, and these are all for the updated data with the final MRIP estimates. is 0.2. So you can see that it's F that's been declining since about 2006. This is the basically the total I showed you, but in a different manner. The dotted lines here are the 95% confidence intervals, and again, our current F in 2012 was 0.2. There we go. This just shows estimates. The upper graph is the estimates of age 1 plus, so the abundance in numbers for all the ages, with the age 1, the abundance projected 1 year ahead based on using the 2012 estimates of the using the 2012 Young of the Year indice estimates. You can see that because of the low recruitment we had, it's declined during the 2000 up to 2010, and then has increased because of the 2011 year class, and then it's expected to drop because of the low 2012 Young of the Year index. And here's the age 8 plus, essentially the large fish, showing a decline since 2006 or so. And it's hard to see, but there is a projection here that goes to about 2013. It shows that the H plus numbers will decline a little bit. This is the estimates of the female spawning stock biomass with the 95% confidence intervals, showing that SSB has been declining since about 2004 or so. And currently we're at about 57,000. Is that right? Yeah, 57,000 metric tons. And this just shows a graph of the total biomass in the population. Peaking around 2000, it's been slowly declining. It did go up a little bit because in 2012 because of the 2011 year class, which were age 1 in 2012. And this just shows the overall recruitment estimates. Remember, this is a combined stock model, so this doesn't always reflect exactly what's going on in Chesapeake Bay only. But you can see that the 2011 year class has shown to be fairly large compared to some of the historical estimates. And retrospective. We do have some a retrospective analysis, just a way of looking at if you take away 1 year's worth of data, how would those the new estimates compare to the ones made with the current year data? And this just shows that for the fully recruited F, we tend to overestimate F in the current year, and on average, it's about I have that written down. It's about 12%. We overestimate F about in the current year, about overestimate by 12%, and female spawning stock biomass, we tend to underestimate in the current year by about 14%. And this just shows if you peel the data back, you get how the estimates compare to the current estimates. It's about average about 14% for 14% for the SSB, and again 12% for the fully recruited F. All right, I'm going to hand this over to Alexi. He's going to talk about the reference points.
Good morning again. I'll give Gary a break, and I'll talk a little bit about the reference points for striped bass. First, we'll talk about the current reference points that we're using up to date, and our reference points, biological reference points, utilize the female spawning biomass and fishing mortality as principal metrics to judge on the status of the stock and the fishery. each of these metrics, spawning stock biomass and fishery mortality, have a target and a threshold that we use to control the fishery. So the general concept, just to remind you that all right. So we have the first vertical line, the threshold. There you go. So we have a minimum spawning stock biomass that we would like to maintain, that we don't want the spawning stock biomass to drop below that line and be in this area. Once we cross that line, we call it overfished. The status of the stock is overfished. I have to remind the audience that the use of the terminology, when we say overfished, it doesn't mean necessarily that we're in immediate danger. All that means is that our spawning stock biomass is below our selected threshold. Depending on the level of uncertainty and depending on the level of risk that we're willing to take, that threshold line could be located in different places, and therefore for different species we may select the position of that threshold line according to our ability and will to stay precautionary or less precautionary as the as our knowledge allows to do so. In addition to the threshold, we have a target spawning stock biomass, which according to certain calculations we believe would be near optimum level, whichever optimum we define is either the biomass that provides the maximum yield. In this case it would be a spawning stock biomass that is equivalent to the maximum sustainable yield. And for the fishing mortality, we have a target fishing mortality of that line. That's where we again, according to theoretical calculations, we assume that we will get the maximum out of the stock. And the threshold line, the limit that we really don't want to cross. And once we cross it, we define this as overfishing. And so generally, the ideal place is to be in this area with the smiley face. So current reference points were defined in Amendment 6 as the threshold for the spawning stock biomass was selected to be equal to the spawning stock biomass in 1995. So this is not theoretically based value. This is the value that picked empirically. And the logic behind it was pretty solid, that it was decided by all of us together about 15 years ago, so no, a little bit less, that the spawning stock biomass of the stock in 1995 is an appropriate threshold, because we believe that by 1995 we announced that the population has been fully restored, and we've already seen the population to reproduce successfully by the successful, very strong, the strongest probably in the modern history of striped bass recruitment of the 1993 year class. Therefore, this was a logical and reasonable selection of the SSB threshold. So for the target, well, obviously you'd like to have a target somewhat larger than your threshold. So the target has been selected to be 25% larger than the threshold. So it's equivalent to 125% of the SSB threshold. Accordingly, last time we've updated the reference points. That was at the peer review 5 years ago, and at the stock assessment workshop in Woods Hole. At that time, the threshold spawning stock biomass was estimated to be equal to 36,000 metric tons, and the target at roughly approximately 46,000 metric tons. So just to recap with how the population performed regarding the current threshold, this vertical line represents the spawning stock biomass threshold, and as you could see historically, the spawning stock biomass has been increasing. Well, these are mostly earlier data points, and the red dots here represent the 2005 through 2010 estimates of SSB and recruitment. So these are the values from the last assessment update prior to this year review that used the existing reference points. With respect to the fishing mortality, we have also threshold and target fishing mortality. The threshold fishing mortality was estimated as the F of MSY, or fishing mortality that corresponds to the maximum sustainable yield. Last time the technical committee derived this value, we've used 4 different stock recruitment models to come up with an estimate of FMSY. And these were competing models which were producing different results. Therefore, the estimates of FMSY varied quite a lot depending on the choice of the recruitment model. And there was no consensus on one single model, so the solution was to use the average. Nonetheless, that has been accepted by peer reviewers in 2007. So our average FMSY estimate was at 0.34, and that's what we've used until recently to judge on the status of overfishing or not overfishing. And the target fishing mortality was also selected to be slightly lower than the threshold. So it was selected to be equal to 25% annual exploitation rate. So with respect to the performance of the fishing mortality relative to the current reference point, based on the most recent update, is that slide shows you the trend in the fishing mortality versus the threshold, which is the the target, which is the dotted line, and the threshold, which is the red line. So the last update with the current reference points that you've seen about a year ago, so indicated that we were not overfishing and not overfished. Following this summer's peer review of new benchmark assessment that Gary had presented to you this morning, there were some changes proposed where no changes to the definition of this spawning stock biomass reference points were done. But the numbers, the actual numbers, have been changed, and I'll tell you in a second why. But we did propose to revise fishing mortality rates as reference points in such a way that we proposed to define F target of fishing mortality that we would like to stay at, that this would be the fishing mortality that in the long term would produce the spawning stock biomass equal to the SSB target. And correspondingly, the F threshold would be the fishing mortality that would bring us to our selected SSB threshold. So why did we do this? Why we felt that there was a need to make those changes? There were several reasons for that. Well, first of all, as I told you already, the estimates of the FMSY that we used in the past, they were very sensitive to the type of the stock recruitment model that are being used, since we were not certain of which one is the most suitable to striped bass. We don't know which one to pick, and depending on which one you pick, you would come up with quite substantial differences in terms of the fish mortality level. Then the additional calculations that would investigate the current FMSY of 0.34 indicated that this would be equivalent to approximately 20% of the spawning potential ratio, which to many of us seem to be too low for the FMSY. That the spawning potential ratio generally should be higher at the FMSY. Then again, the simulations indicated that if we'll try to calculate the SSB MSY using stock recruitment data, that SSB MSY would be larger than our 1995 threshold. So there was clearly disconnect between the FMSY as calculated based on theoretical curve and the selected SSB level. Therefore, the committee decided that we should change that and use long-term projections by drawing from empirical recruitment out of the model since 1990 and use average selectivity, which would represent the effect of the fishery on the different age classes. And we'll calculate fish mortality, which will exactly produce SSB target and SSB threshold. Of course, exactly meaning generally in the long term. What are the advantages? Well, the advantages would be that then 1995 SSB or spawning stock biomass would be robust or not dependent on model assumptions about stock recruitment relationship. And it also avoids the managing to optimal yield for recreational species, meaning that traditionally we're managing towards FMSY, which optimizes the total yield of biomass that is being taken from the population. In the case of recreational species, it's probably not what necessarily we want to do. And so this, in the end, it aligns spawning stock biomass reference points with the fish mortality and target target and thresholds. That is, if we maintain the fish mortality at the target, we should, on average, maintain the SSB at the target, and same to the threshold. Once we've done that, there are certain inputs that come into calculation of those reference points, and those are the sex ratio, male to female, and we did not change that compared to the previous assessment. We kept the same maturity information. We revised the natural mortality, which did you cover the natural mortality changes? Yes. So the natural mortality has been increased for the younger ages, which generally works this way, that when you increase natural mortality, you increase an estimated size of the population, which in turn leads to the reduction in the estimated fishing mortality. And you will see that in a second. So we used the new statistical catch-at-age model. In the heart of the model, there was the Beaverton-Halt stock recruitment model, and we also updated mean weights at age, which are not critical for the assessment, but had to be updated. So these are the inputs that come into the calculation of reference points, just to show you how things are changing as a result of that. This blue line continuing into red line would be our understanding of the natural mortality at age. That is, we use it as a constant value of 0.15 for all age groups. So with the updated information, the natural mortality is believed to be much higher at the younger ages, and it declines and rapidly, and about by age 7 becomes equivalent to 0.15. The selectivity on the age classes has not changed much, and therefore did not affect much of the reference point calculation. But what does change, and what did indeed change, was the calculated spawning stock biomass. and that is a primary effect of increasing the natural mortality rate. Therefore, if more fish are dying at the same level of the harvest, there have to be more fish present in the water. Therefore, the model calculates the SSB much higher than the previously used model. And this certainly shows very clearly in the estimated number of recruits. This is what the number of recruits that the previous model would calculate, and that's what the new values of recruitment would be using the new natural mortality rates. So finally, we're coming to the what in the end we've calculated, and this would be so our SSB. Let's start with the SSB threshold. Our SSB threshold was estimated at 57.9 thousand metric tons. All right. Gary is telling me that that my table includes the numbers that we've used at the peer review in late July, and they were updated since what is 2012. All right. All right. So the SSB limit, I have it here as 57.9 thousand metric tons. The updated one is 57.6 thousand metric tons. That's compared to 36,000 metric tons, which it used to be. The SSB target, here we have it 72,380. The correct one, the updated one, is 72 and 23 metric tons. Yes, thresholds. Yes, yeah. Limit and thresholds are being used interchangeably. So yes, sorry, I should have used threshold. And fish mortality target. I have a 0.75 here. It's rounded up. It's 0.18. And then that limit, I have it 0.21 here, and it's 0.29. 0.2, well, I'm sorry, 0.219, yes, 0.219. So, well, we're not measuring with, the precision to 3 digits, obviously. And the current fish mortality is 0.2, right? And SSB of 58.2. And on the right there, these are the plus minus standard errors for, so these are essentially the 95 confidence limit intervals for those parameters. So where we are in terms of the new reference points, well, the red vertical line is our new proposed SSB threshold. The green line is our target for the spawning stock biomass. The green dotted line is our new proposed target fish mortality, and the red horizontal line is our threshold. This is supposed to represent the 2012 data point. It has to be moved a little bit. It has to be right on the border of the red vertical line here. Just move a little bit to the left, so we are at the border with it, but barely touching it. So the reference points probably was the element of the stock assessment that has received the greatest attention and a bit of beating at the peer review, but in the end, the peer review members agreed with us that this empirical approach is probably the most logical, and that the choice, if we were to go with the theoretical stock recruitment curves, that there was too much sensitivity of the results depending on the choice of the model, and at that point this has to be an area of investigation, while for the practical use the proposed approach in the end has been decided to be the best to go with. There are a couple of elements that might affect the actual numbers, as Gary mentioned. One is that we do have some retrospective bias, which we have to keep in mind when we use these reference points to and compare with the current estimate on where we are. And there is also a potential bias and a desired correction. If we will use in the future, we'll be able to use in the future aging based on the outlets versus aging based on the scales. These also tend to change somewhat the results of the status of the stock. And finally, if you do decide to adopt these reference points, because at this point, as I understand, this is what we propose and what's been endorsed by the peer review, but it requires your action. I'll just remind you that these are coast-wide reference points. We have, based on these, we have a F-based reference point specifically for the Chesapeake Bay, as well as the Albemarle Sound and Roanoke, which are slightly lower, and that the fishing mortality thresholds are slightly lower. So if you adopt this, those should be appropriately adjusted. And this concludes my presentation and reference points. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. And Alexa, that was an excellent presentation. Would there be any objection to letting Patrick Canfield review the panel peer review results before we open it up for comment and discussion? We got more? All right, we're still going on.
Oops, thank you. Just going to show you some of the results that Alexi was talking about. This is the current, the fully recruited F trajectory from the model compared to the threshold and target. So 2012 here, you can see that we're below the threshold and above the target, so we're not overfishing. This is the, whoops, oh, thank you. This is the SSB, female SSB trajectory. This is the horizontal line of the threshold, and you can see that our current estimate is pretty close to the threshold. Although it's not, whoops, can you go back? It's not quite over. The point estimate's not quite over. So theoretically, based on the point estimate, not overfished.
Excuse me, Gary, is that SSB where it would have been under the old model? I mean, is this a higher, did you say this is, your prediction of where SSB actually is higher than it was under the previous assessment for right now?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
This is the new 1995 SSB level, and this is the estimate for the current level. Does that make sense?
But yeah, but we're much closer now to the threshold than we were under the previous, using the update from the previous assessment.
Yeah. And this is just a table just showing the probability of a 2012 SSB value being less than or equal to the current SSB reference point, the new reference point. If we were right on top of the, if our current SSB level is right on top of the SSB reference point, the probability would be 0.5, and if it went below that, SSB went below that, then this number would increase above 0.5. So based on the current model, we're almost right on top of the SSB reference point. However, and now it's kind of in vogue now to try and correct for the retrospective patterns we see. And if we do that, again, we were underestimating SSB in the current year. So if I correct for that 14% and adjust it, the probability of being below the SSB reference point is only about 0.12. Same thing with the fishing reference point. If we assume, well, the issue with the reference point, we don't always have error, so I had to assume some different error around it. if we assume the reference point has no error, our current fishing mortality estimate being greater than or equal to that reference point is 0.24, and with error it's 0.31. But if we correct for the retrospective pattern of being overestimating 12%, it drops down to 0.04 and 0.13. I'm just going to show you some sensitivity runs. These are some of the results comparing fully recruited fishing mortality to the and the SSB reference point between what we submitted for the benchmark, which is in red, and the update with the 2012 final data. You can see just some slight differences between the two. The estimates and the patterns and the trends are pretty much the same. This upper graph is comparing our current updated assessment to the 2011 assessment, which was the last one. You can see that our trends in F are fairly close. The magnitude changed a little bit, and our F's are a little bit lower in the 2012 model. The lower graph is the SSB estimates. You can see, again, because of the natural mortality changes, that our SSB levels are a lot higher, and our trends, particularly in the last few years, have become steeper compared to the 2011 assessment. This just shows, we also did some sensitivity runs because we want to switch to odorless, but we still don't have enough information from a lot of the states to do that, so we did some exercises where we looked at what would happen if we had a proper conversion matrix, and this just shows some of the results. If you corrected the scale ages up to 13 plus, had a 13 plus model compared to correcting the scales, and you had a age 15 plus model, you get some differences where the scale bias corrected models produce higher F than, in some cases, than the current model. SSB becomes a lot higher, and the recruitment estimates in the lower graph become more variable. And the next one just shows comparing the current model with the age-specific natural mortality values to a base model with just the constant natural mortality, and you can see our base model produces lower Fs than assuming 0.15 for all ages, and then SSB is a bit higher than with a model that assumes a constant natural mortality. And we're going to get into projections now. Essentially what we did was, and these are in the document, we looked at some simulations where we projected the abundance of the population forward in time to 2017. We essentially calculated a number of different things. The probability of the SSB over time going below the SSB reference point, the new reference point. For the projections, we used the current selectivity pattern in 2012, and then for 2013 and 2007, we averaged a selectivity pattern from 2008 to 2012. And we didn't assume any type of recruitment function. We just sampled the estimates of recruitment from 1990 to 2012. We did this thousands of times. We looked at different Fs. We also looked at changing. We also did projections where we changed the amount harvested over time to different levels. And this is a projection showing what would happen to SSB if you fished at 0.2 over the time period, which is the current F. And on the left is the SSB projection. The red is the median value for the 1,000 repetitions. And then this is the probability of going below the SSB reference point. Again, anything below about 0.5, that means we're going way below. You can see if we just continue to fish over time, SSB is going to drop down to about below the reference point, but it'll start to slowly creep up after 2015, and that's primarily due to the 2011 year class coming in. You can see the probabilities here start to decline. Different levels. These are projections using constant F from 2014, the upper, and then constant F from 2015 to 2017. The slight differences here because we're not changing anything in 2014. The probabilities are lower. Again, it still peaks in 2015, but goes down a bit faster. And below, if we change, start fishing at 0.18 in 2015, you're still going to get this peak in 2015 where you're below the reference point, but then it slowly goes back up. This one just shows what happens if we fish at the current reference point of 0.219. You'll see the SSB is declining, and it stays a bit below the reference point. There's a high probability of it being below it, and then it's going to slowly creep down. And then this, that's the upper one was starting in 2014, and then starting in 2015, if we fished at 0.219, again, it's going to peak in about 2050. Probability of being below is going to peak in 2015, and then slowly the probability starts to decline. Next slide. This just shows what would happen if we actually fished at the old reference point of 0.34. The SSB just tanks. This is starting in 2014. The probability goes up, and it's 1 until 2017. We didn't go any farther than that. If we started fishing at 0.34 in 2015, again, the SSB just tanks. And again, the probability of being below the reference point stays at 1. And these are just shown some different levels of F at 0.15. We started in 2014. We get some quicker recovery. Starting in 2014, you can see the probability doesn't go as high, and the probability actually steeply drops after 2015. Pretty similar to in 2015, there'll be a peak when we'll be below it, but then it quickly drops and goes below, and the reference point starts to go above the reference point. The 2012, the fishing mortality starts, no, the SSB starts to go above the reference point quickly after 2015. And these are just some other levels of F. If we drop F down to 0.1, you get a quicker recovery. There's a difference. There's a lag, if you start at 2015, but it drops pretty quickly after that. And then we look at some constant harvest scenarios. On the left is the SSB, the median projection of SSB for 3 different levels of reduction. The purple here is status quo of the harvest that occurred in 2012. The blue here is a 20% reduction, and then the red is a 40% reduction. You can see, the more you reduce, the quicker the SSB goes back up after 2015. On the right is just the probability of being overfished. Again, it's similar to some of the other graphs we showed, where it's going to peak in 2015, and depending on the level of reduction, you'll still get a drop. The probability of being below the threshold will start to decline. This just shows for the same constant harvest scenario what the F patterns in fully recruited fishing mortality would be. The left just shows the pattern in F, and the right is the probability of going over the F reference point. You can see again the same thing. You reduce F, and this is starting in 2015. If you reduce the harvest, if there's a 40% reduction, you get a big drop in F. The dotted line here, by the way, is the target, F target. if you only drop 20%, it only drops down a little bit. But if you look at the probability here, we never really go below 0.5 of being of the F being above the reference point. But after, if we reduce it, these different levels, the harvest of these different levels after 2015, things get dropped down pretty quickly. This is just looking at whether we implement a 20% reduction between starting in 2014 or 2015. The blue is the 2015, and the red is 2014. Still, SSB is still going to decline, but then depending on where you start, you'll get a different pattern in recovery, where if it started in 2014, the SSB levels will be a bit higher, and increasing a little bit faster than if we started in 2015. And on the right are the F estimates of starting in 2014 or 15. You can see that depending on where you start, if you started later, the drop in F, of course, would go down later. And just one more slide. People always say, well, how do you know the results from the statistical catch-at-age model are accurate? And this slide just shows a comparison between the total mortality estimates that you can get out of the model compared to the total mortality estimates that we get out of the tagging data. The blue here is the average for the coast-wide programs, of the tagging programs, and then the red are the total mortality estimates from the producer areas, Chesapeake Bay, Delaware Bay, and Hudson River. You can see we're pretty much in the ballpark, same trends over time, about the same levels of total mortality. So that kind of, compared to the tagging data, it suggests that the statistical catch-at-age model is fairly accurate. So that's all I have.
All right, thanks again, Gary. That's a great presentation, a lot of information. Quick question, Pat?
Excellent presentation, Gary and Alexis. A question, you had a chart about 5 or 6 back when you talked about if we went to constant mortality for a period of time to 2014, and we'd see the SSB slow down a little bit. I guess the question that comes to mind is, first off, a lot of our folks on Long Island are concerned about another crash. Do something immediately to reduce the pressure on the large fish. And I'm wondering if you can recall what the actual status of the female population, SSB, was when we had the crash, when we had the moratorium. I try to vaguely remember what it was. I thought it was like 20 or 30 million pounds. It was a strange number, but I wonder if you can recall that, because somehow I think we need to make the public aware. There's a lot of emotion here, but the reality of it is that the board will take action to correct where we're going now. But nothing to compare against other than saying it's going to crash and we're going to go back to where we were. So if we can come up with a number about where the SSB was back then, 95, 94, 95, 96, compare it to where we will be if we assume we stay where we are until 2015, that SSB might be 58, whatever that number is. And it's not going to go down in that danger zone where we're ultimately going to crash. I think it's important to get that information out to the public and on the record. If you could supply that, we'd appreciate it.
All right, perhaps they can look at that information. Take one more question from Jim, and then I really think it would be beneficial for time management to get into peer review. Thanks.
Just a quick question. On those projections, and you may have said this, but it was what was the assumption on recruitment? Was that going to be level throughout the every one of those projections, or there was essentially going to be, or was there any suggestion that if there was an increase in recruitment, those projections would be better?
We used the recruitment values from 1990 to 2012 and just randomly drew those from that distribution. So it's essentially, it's about an average recruitment over time. Yeah, the SSB wouldn't really be impacted by those until after like 2017 because of the 2011 would. That's why the SSB slowly increases, regardless of what we did, because the 2011 year class is working its way through into the SSB level.
All right, thanks. I imagine we'll be maybe asking to pull up those slides again as we consider management response later in the agenda. Now let's go forward and let Patrick Canfield give a presentation on the peer review of the stock assessment. Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will briefly summarize the findings from the independent peer review of the Stripe Bass stock assessment. The Striper assessment was reviewed through the Northeast Science Center's Stock Assessment Review Committee, or SARC process. The review panel consisted of the chair and 3 scientists from the Center for Independent Experts, with the review having an emphasis on only evaluating the science and the assessment, and not to consider management implications of those results. The SARC process results in a number of reports or products, 3 individual reviewer reports from the CIE folks, a review panel consensus report, and an overall shorter summary report. All of those, I should say most of those, are available on the Center's site. We're still awaiting the final consensus report. Again, the peer review workshop took place in late July of this year. The chair was Dr. Cynthia Jones from Old Dominion University. The 3 independent experts were Robin Cook, John Simmons, and Henrik Sparholt, all from Scotland and Denmark. The overall outcome of the peer review is that the stock assessment was accepted. The stock is not overfished, and overfishing is not occurring in 2012. And again, the panel finds that the stock assessment is acceptable for management use. And next, I'll go through each individual assessment term of reference and provide the review panel's findings based on each term. First, to investigate all fisheries-independent and dependent data sets, discuss strengths and weaknesses of each data source, and evaluate evidence for changes in natural mortality in recent years. The panel concluded that the assessment completed this term successfully and had a specific recommendation to re-examine the age-aggregated recreational index using different models and/or by truncating the age range of that index. The second term was to estimate the commercial and recreational landings and discards, characterize the uncertainty in the data and spatial distribution of the fisheries. Again, the panel concluded that the assessment addressed this term fully. They had 2 specific recommendations. One, to organize the fishery-dependent data in the model to represent actual fishing fleets, i.e. commercial and recreational components, as opposed to the current fishing fleets separated more geographically, Chesapeake, coastal, and then the commercial dead discards. The panel also recommended attempting to, next time around, to split the assessment into female and male components to account for the sexual dimorphism. The third term was to use the statistical catch-at-age model to estimate fishing mortality, recruitment, abundance, and biomass, also provide retrospective analyses, and to provide estimates of exploitation by stock component, where possible for the total stock complex. Again, the review concluded that this term was completed and the current assessment is acceptable for estimating the status of the stock. A few specific recommendations from the panel were to reevaluate model sensitivity to the Maryland Spawning Stock Survey Index and the Recreational Aggregate Index because they are primary drivers and have great influence on the results. Again, the assessment model is based on 3 fleets that do not correspond to the real fisheries. It may be possible to reformulate the assessment into 2 or more fleets, each with landings and discard components, allowing the commercial and recreational fisheries to be considered separately. And again, the panel recommended splitting the assessment into female and male components, given the implications on mortality and the derivation of reference points. And finally, as I think Gary alluded to, explore the potential bias caused by the use of scales to age individuals, where we're currently not using photos. The fourth term was to use the tag return model and associated modeling components to estimate F and abundance for coastwide and producer area tag programs, along with uncertainty of those estimates. The review panel agreed the assessment completed this term fully and had recommendations to include tag estimated mortality in the assessment, either to estimate a new discard survival rate or to confirm that the discard rate that we're currently using is accurate. And also a recommendation to explore data on re-releases of tagged fish that may be more typical of fishery releases than those released by the tagging program. The fifth term was to update or redefine the biological reference points and to define stock status. Again, the panel agreed that the stock assessment successfully defined and evaluated stock status relative to the reference points. The assessment produced internally consistent F and SSB thresholds and targets. Based on non-parametric assumption that future recruitment will be similar to past recruitment. Overall, the approach does not estimate FMSY or BMSY explicitly, but provides management reference points that promote high and stable long-term yield. The sixth term of reference were to provide annual projections of catch and biomass, and to use a sensitivity analysis covering a range of assumptions about the most important sources of uncertainty in the assessment, including potential changes in natural mortality. The panel agreed that the assessment conducted the projections correctly and addressed this term. The projections need to be run with the same recruitment model that is used for calculation of the reference points. And again, a recommendation that the current three-fleet approach makes it difficult to estimate mortality separately from the two main fisheries, and suggests reformulating the model into recreational and commercial fleets. The last term of reference, term 7, was to review and evaluate the research recommendations from the previous benchmark stock assessment and review, identify new research recommendations, and recommend the timing of future assessments. The assessment addressed this term, and again, they had recommendations for future work on developing an aggregate index from all the state surveys. The panel thought that was a high priority. Also suggested examining issues related to sexually differentiated migrations, and consider differences in exploitation of males and females regarding migratory behavior and its influence on the reference points. And suggested evaluating a two-area spatial assessment model to account for the differences between the Chesapeake Bay and coastal fisheries. The overall findings of the SARC review, again, were that the stock assessment was accepted, but the stock is not overfished, and overfishing is not occurring in the last year of the assessment. Aggregating commercial and recreational catch makes the results less clear. Striped Bass has a history of ad hoc reference points, and they agreed with and commended the current assessment's development of internally consistent F and SSB thresholds and targets, consistent with the SSB 1995. All of the available data were gathered and used correctly in the assessment models. Assessment is robust to different model formulations, and the modeling approach is stable. The review panel also agreed with the assessment team that the natural mortality is higher at younger ages, so we used differential mortality by age in the assessment. They agreed with that approach. And finally, the estimates of both recreational and commercial dead discards are sensitive to assumed values of post-release mortality. I guess a few more recommendations. Down the line, to improve the coordination of the fishery-independent surveys to better match the temporal and spatial use of habitats by striped bass, and to attempt to standardize the state or coastal surveys, again, to better address the temporal and spatial availability of stock and toward providing a more meaningful combined stock index. I mentioned this earlier, but also to explore the development of a model with separate male and female components. Also, given the non-uniform spatial distribution of stock by age, try to obtain a better model of selection for the recreational index, or to simply truncate the age range of the index. The panel also recommended examining whether modeling is consistent between the analyses done for projections and those done to define the biological reference points. And they noted that the management targets based on female spawning stock biomass may need to be reconsidered if exploitation of males is significant. So that's a quick report based on the SARC review. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. So I guess where we are now with the agenda is we need to ask any questions, have some discussion, so that we can get to a point where the board feels informed enough to take action as to whether or not to accept the reference points or not accept them. If the board wants to accept them, we need to initiate an addendum process. And before we get into any motions on that, I would like to then ask Mike to give a slide just to help the board focus on the different options and scenarios that I think would facilitate our discussion. But before we get to that, let's open it up for some questions on the assessment peer review. Got Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to Gary and Alexi and Pat for the information. I know there'll be a lot of questions, so if it would be acceptable, I'll have just a few questions now and then wait my turn if necessary till everyone has a chance to speak. One thing I noticed on the recreational data was a lot of declines depending on the states that were shown, and I wasn't sure how much was put into effort information, the trip information, because you see some of those stark declines, but certainly I know in Virginia, right around 2007, economic factors certainly had something to do with less effort. I don't know whether the committee looked at that. That's one question. Another question relates to the 12% and 14% for F and SSB respectively on the bias. And I guess times have changed, but I know about 5 or 6 years ago at the Northeast Fishery Science Center they had a workshop on retrospective bias, and I wasn't there, but I did see the PowerPoint presentation, and I think one of the conclusions was you really can't do much to adjust it. So I guess maybe that has changed a little bit, Gary, with what you've done. And at the same time, I wasn't sure whether those percentages were multi-year. So is that multi-terminal year where you came up with the 12 and 14%? So that's two questions. The third question has to do with the times changing again. It wasn't so long ago, maybe a half a dozen years ago, where the thought of including recreational data or commercial data as both catch and an index was a little bit off limits. And since the aggregate recreational index is a pretty big component in the SCA for the output, I was wondering whether the peer review panel, when that was mentioned by Pat about relooking at the aggregate index, whether there was any concern there or whether that type of concern has been, gone away as far as modernization of using information in both the index part and the catch. So thanks.
You guys try to tag team that?
Yeah.
3 questions there.
Okay, in terms of the decline in catch, I'm not sure if it's effort because I didn't really look at that. Probably it could be, but I think Massachusetts it hasn't been. I can speak with our state. The second question was, forget it. Oh, that's the 12% and 14 is an average for those 5 years. Oh, and whether to adjust or not seems to be in vogue now. I've sat on a SARC-like committee for NIMS, and they're doing that now. Even though there's some danger of that, but I think with striped bass, the pattern has always been overestimating F and underestimating SSB. So I think we were confident in doing that. And then the third. What was the third question? I'm sorry.
May I, Mr. Chairman? It was on the aggregate index.
Oh, yes. The MRIP index is based on a subset of data from using the number of it's using the raw intercept data, and we only use the offshore and the boat mode data. And yes, there is some what's the word, incestuous relationship, and we have explored that because I did notice this time when the assessment is fairly sensitive to it. And we had a conference call, and it was decided to leave it in. And the impact on the assessment is to essentially just change the magnitude of the abundance. The trends are the same, and if we did that, the SSB would, I think, drop a little bit, and be, but still the conclusion would be we're still not overfished, and overfishing isn't occurring. So we need to explore that in the future because we could do a number of things as suggested by the SARC review, which we had actually already thought of, but we hadn't had time to do that. Oh, right. And the panel didn't have any objection to leaving it that way.
Great, thanks. I got Tom Forty and then John Clark.
I guess I'm following up on one of Rob's questions because I'll just give you New Jersey's figures. In about 2004, we had 220,000 boats registered in New Jersey. And before Sandy in 2012, we had 160,000 boats registered. That's a dramatic drop in boats, and I'm waiting for the figures this year, which will probably show us another 30,000 boats not in the water because of conditions. Also, if we look at a registry this year, we're down a third. The party and charter boat registry is down a third, so we show less effort. What also happened during that period of time, in 2007 is the period of time when gas prices went through the roof, and it changed the behavior of striped bass fishermen in a big way. People would travel from Leroy's area and Lawrence area and come to New Jersey shore, and they stopped making those trips when it cost them $50 for a tank of gas to go back and forth. So we've changed that kind of attitude. We also have changed where people used to run around all day and catch and release striped bass because they had a lot of fun doing that, but they burned a lot of gas on the boat, and now they catch their 2 fish and go home. So when I want to look at all that, did anybody ever discuss that in the social economic study that we need to do to look at it? Because striped bass is a prime subject on that. Because again, when we opened the fishery in the 90s, most of the recreational sector was participating was doing catch and release. And they were basically not taking a lot of fish because they were all worried about the stock rebuilding. That has changed. We basically, because we have affected other species like summer flounders, black sea bass, tautog, and other species, they direct on striped bass more to take home the fish to eat. And so that has changed how we basically should look at striped bass. So that's a whole big range of things that we have not put into this equation, or have we? Or is anybody asking that questions at the SOAR or the technical committee, or are they planning to ask those types of questions? Because I think it's an important part of what we're doing with striped bass, and it explains some of the drop in numbers because it's fisherman dependent when you look at it. And you know, it's always stymies that we don't do that. We don't consider that in the socioeconomic. It sits on the back burner. We find the models, but we never do the socioeconomic to back it up.
Thanks, Tom. So I think what I hear from Rob and then Tom is, in regards to the assessment, how sensitive is it to if fish mortality was influenced through socioeconomics, and that was the reason why effort dropped. And it's a question that's being asked, whether that was considered or not, and if not, what is your thoughts in regards to how it may influence the assessment results?
I'm trying to find some slides, but in the 2011 assessment that we did, I didn't do it this time, but I should have showed the for the MRIP data, the catch per unit effort using trips, and I have the old slides here if you want to see what those were like. And it did show for the states, for like the release information, the same trends in the declines that I showed up there when the numbers are adjusted for the number of trips. So the declines in the releases are real. The harvest, however, if I can find this. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I was looking at total. This is the total catch per trip, and the trends did show declines. Do you want to see those from the old? Okay, up here on the slide, this is the total catch per trip. So it's the release and the harvest information together divided by the total number of trips. Up in the right-hand corner are the states of Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. And you can see the total catch per trip, particularly in Maine, and this goes to 2012 only. Excuse me, 2010. You can see all these three states. So in about 2006, the total catch per trip has dropped some similar patterns existing. Down here is Maryland and Virginia showing basically the same thing in 2010. So actually the drops you see in the harvest and the release numbers are not due to, in some respects, due to people not fishing as much. So it's related to how the population is changing. But if you look at like New Jersey and other states, Delaware, you can see, I don't mean it that way. You can see that in Delaware there was a pretty steep drop starting in about 2008, and New Jersey, slowly but variable. And then you look at Rhode Island and Connecticut, showing that they're actually total catch per trip is actually I think I remember at the 2011 assessment update, I tried to explain that we saw those declining trends in the outskirts of the distribution so in the middle here, in the center of the distribution, which is also influenced by the Hudson River, you're getting a different pattern. And then New York has a completely different pattern, showing a decline since the early 90s. That was it.
Thanks, Gary. Got
speaking of that other state of that complex,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're the first state, so thank you very much, Gary and Alexi and Stock System for the impressive work here. But I'm just wondering when the complete assessment will be available. We have staff that wanted to review actually everything that went into this so we can get a better idea of how to arrive at all this. We were told that due to the government shutdown, assessment should be available soon, but it's not available yet. We know when it will be available. Thank you.
I'm talking with the Science Center just this past week. We got the same answer. Due to the government shutdown, it's not yet available. It will become available in November. But it was supposed to be ready, I think, mid-September.
Anything else, John?
Yeah, well, just to follow up on that, that, as I said, it's just one of those things where I think it's important for states to be able to evaluate the entire assessment before we vote. Thank you.
Doug?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Gary and Alexi, for an outstanding report. I had a couple questions, and I'll try not to inundate you with them all at once. The first one, I think, Alexi, you referred to the fact that we have a updated reference point, but in Chesapeake Bay and in North Carolina, because of differential size limits, that is the target reference point will actually be lower. Has that been calculated yet, or is it going to? If we accept this this stock assessment with the new reference point, then the technical committee would go and calculate what that would be. Correct?
At your direction, we understand that you would have to direct us to do this, and we'll gladly do this for you.
Hopefully we can do it, because I think that's a part of our management, and clearly something that we'd have to take into consideration in any management actions that we're going to be taking, that we might be considering. And then finally, just a follow-up. I heard the term that considering retro patterns are now in vogue. Should I take that as a something that the technical committee would feel comfortable with us using as part of our management, considering the retrospective pattern as part of our management action here? Are you comfortable with that now?
I cannot speak for the technical committee because we did not have the specific discussion of that nature, but as I would guess that based on what Gary said earlier, there certainly seemed to be an evolution in the world of stock assessment. Well, at least through at the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, at the federal councils, etc. It is becoming pretty regular now exercise of making an adjustment for the species where we do see consistent bias, like in the case of striped bass. So, but I wouldn't want to speak for the committee because they were not charged specifically to discuss that. I would speculate that probably they would agree to do that.
All right, thanks. I got Paul Diodati, Richie White, and David Borden.
I noticed that when I pull my microphone, I pull it away from Rhode Island, which is fine. Thanks, Gary, Lexi, Pat. That was great. So based on what you just pointed out with the CPUE estimates, Gary, I guess it's safe to assume that it's not fisheries performance changes that are showing stock depletion. It's definitely, well, the CPUE is dropping. It's not just the overall catches because of something going on in cost of gas or people's desire not to fish as much.
Yeah, I would interpret it that way.
Okay. And I guess, relative to the government shutdown and maybe some of our state scientists that haven't seen all of the information, for whatever reason that may be, the peer review was completed. Your team has done its work. It's presented it to for the peer review, which I think you actually indicated the type of membership that had. So it sounds to me like, regardless of who looks at it tomorrow, this is a pretty well done assessment at this point and considered to be ready to be used.
I would say,
yeah.
I agree.
Okay. And one of our commissioners asked to try to put current conditions in context with historical conditions, and he talked about the 95 levels. And I think one of the reference points you're using now is 125% of the 1995 SSB, and that reference point is about 72,380 tons. So that means that in 1995, the SSB value was probably at around 58,000 tons. So, which means that current SSB, based on your 2012 projection of about 62,000 tons, is just slightly above where we were in 1995 when we called this a restoration, which was pretty debatable at the time because I was involved in that. So it was pretty much a jump ball whether or not the resource was officially restored in 1995. But we did declare it for a number of qualifying factors that went into that, that it was restored. So that's where we're at. And I think the period of moratorium and true stock depletion, we were probably at half that. That was back in the late 1970s and early 80s, and that was probably at around 25,000 tons. So we're not anywhere near that very low period, but we are at that period where we would be questioning whether or not this resource is restored. So do you disagree with any of that?
Well, maybe it would be helpful for us to look at the graph of the spawning stock biomass, through time. I think late 80s and for example, 1990, when the fishery was reopened after 5 years of moratorium. As I recall it, the SSB was estimated using our current assessment results, probably around 20,000 metric tons, which is 1/3 of where we now. The 1993 record year class has been produced by the spawning stock, which was roughly 42,000 metric tons. Our current, and the 1995 SSB has been estimated to be at 58,000 metric tons. So we're definitely not in the area of the consistent, of the spawning stock being as low as where the recruitment really fails. So I think we're still in the area of the sustainable reproduction. But if we do define this reference point as our threshold, and therefore we will have to act according to the management plan. Once we are below the threshold, we will have to make some corrective actions. I don't know. They're
trying to get it. All right, we can come back to that. Let's keep moving along. I think it's a really good distinction.
I think we're roughly in agreement then, based on what I just heard. So I guess I want to clarify, based on the assessment, and especially the retrospective analysis of where we have been. Have we gone below targets or thresholds given our new reference points? And I know that you talked about a projection that clearly we will do that, but have we already done that retrospectively?
Historically, if we use the new F reference point, it would have indicated back in between 2004 and 6 that yes, we were overfishing at that time. If we also use the new, the same SSB reference point, we weren't overfished. But historically, yes. Could you go back to that? F. So you can see back in 2006, around there, using the new reference point, we were overfished for a short time. Overfishing, sorry. I even get those messed up. And then in 2011, it looks like we were too, but briefly. Now, if we go to the SSB, we might have been close in 97, or whatever. Yeah, that's 97, 98. But we haven't been since 1995 anyway.
Mm-hmm. And it's the result of the peer review is that we should be using the new reference points, and it's also the recommendation of the technical committee that we should be using the new reference points. So I guess under the current management plan, we are not. So there's a technical correction that needs to be made. So I guess it's difficult for us to pass judgment on what the next step is, because it would be, in my opinion, time to take a correction when you consider that we've already gone in areas where we don't want to be with this fishery. And your projections are telling us that we're going to do that again very soon. So, it seems that the corrective action is upon us, but, so I'm not sure what comes first, the cart or the horse here, given that the current plan is still dealing with the old reference points. But it's pretty clear to me, and I understand that we've all heard from a lot of our clients out there, members of the fishing public, that they're concerned about conditions in the fishery. And as we talk more about that, I think we really want to be thinking about where is the true fisheries production coming from, the recreational or the commercial fishery, and I think in this case it's truly the recreational fishery. And those members of that community that I'm hearing from are supporting cuts in this fishery. And I think this information is doing that. So I want us to be very crystal clear in our thinking as we move forward. But thanks, that's cleared up some of my thoughts, at least on the technical presentation.
All right, thanks, Paul. And just to kind of, where we are at this point is we're discussing whether or not to accept the benchmark stock assessment. And then if we do that, we'll move into the next agenda item, which is to discuss what management response. So got about 5 more people on the list, so let's get through that and see if we can get to a point of taking action on the stock assessment. Guy Richie White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like Pat and Paul, I'm hearing from a lot of constituents. And I'm hearing terms like collapse, catastrophe. You're gonna manage this like Atlantic cod. My question comes from a comment that says you bet the farm, or you're betting the farm on the 2011 year class. So my question is, if the 2011 year class had been below average, where would we be? And then the second part would be, going forward for the next 3 or 4 years, if we have below average recruitment, where will we be?
if the 2011 was below average, we would not see that increase in SSB in the projections. It would probably still go down. If it continues to be below average after 2011, then we'll probably see an uptick in SSB, but then it'll go down again as those low levels work itself through. But it'll be many years before that happens. Does that answer your question?
Thanks, David Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first suggestion is that we should pass the hat and all donate money so we can buy a longer cord so that we don't have to move the microphones back and forth. I've got and I'd also note that I do enjoy taking the microphone away from Mr. Diodati on occasion. I guess my question is for Gary. The commercial, it's very troubling to me that the commercial discards have increased to the extent that they have there. The way I look at the figure, I think it's table 4, they've essentially gone to the highest levels in the entire time series. And you may have said this, and I may have missed it, but I don't understand why. Effort, as being managed by the New England Council, Mid-Atlantic Council, and this commission has fallen like a stone in most of the commercial fisheries. So why the bycatch discards going up the way they are? That's one question.
Well, for the most part, they're mostly state fisheries that are catching these fish. Would you agree? Yeah.
It's state waters, fisheries, and is it based on observer data?
No, we actually estimate it based on tagging data and also the MRIP data. So we essentially take the MRIP data. We have a ratio of the tag that are recovered in the recreational fishery and then the commercial fishery, and we just do kind of an expansion from there. So there's a lot of error in those estimates.
Okay, and then where are the discards taking place? Are they primarily taking place in the producer areas, or is it along a coast, or both?
I think it's mostly from the producer areas. I can't remember specifically, but
okay.
But when we estimate the discards, we actually estimate it for Chesapeake Bay, the coast, Delaware Bay, and then those 3 areas.
Yeah, I mean, I just reiterate my prior statement. I think it's problematic that they've gone up to the extent they've gone up. I think it's something the board should look at some point. But my next question for you is the projections you put in implementation 2014. Did that assume January 1st, 2014, or when in 2014?
Yeah, it would be January 2014. It's just a value that happens.
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, there's no proposed action, management action to implement any of those changes. So, I mean, we'd have to rerun, my assumption is we'd have to rerun those projections because you couldn't put them in place before the fisheries start in the Mid-Atlantic. Is that correct?
Whoop, we do have, you're right, but we also have the 2015 projections too. Okay. So you could go with those.
Okay, and then I'd follow up on Richie White's, and this is my last one, Mr. Chairman, follow up on Richie White's question. I was going to ask a similar question, but how this issue of the strength of the recent year class, how accurate are the point estimates of year class strength? I mean, over time, when we estimate a year class strength for the first time, each year you get a new data point that validates that over time. How accurate are those estimates, those initial estimates, proven over time?
Well, there will be some retrospective issues in that first year, but we've never seen a year class disappear in the data as you're moving forward in time, because the Chesapeake Bay Young of the Year Index is a very good indication of what's coming out. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. Got 6 people on our list, so let's keep it moving. John Clark, then David Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't bring up the idea of giving more time to examine this just to delay. We saw some things in the assessment summary that raised, I think, some interesting questions. One of them, Gary, you showed the chart showing the instantaneous mortality, total mortality for both the tag recapture studies and the statistical catch at age models that were very similar. Yet in a previous draft of the assessment report, we saw there was also a comparison of the F from the fishing mortality from the tagging studies and from the statistical catch at age, and the F from the tagging studies was much lower than the statistical catch at age model. So would that suggest that there could be a difference in the natural mortality calculated from each of these models? Would this tie into the mortality we're seeing in the Chesapeake Bay? I mean, is this not a situation where it's not fishing pressure that's causing some of this? And the other thing I was wondering is if spawning stock biomass is somewhat of a proxy for egg production, was any of the striped bass egg work done in the Chesapeake by Maryland looked at as part of the assessment? Thank you.
For the comparison of the tagging models and the statistical catch at age, it's always been a contention on members of both committees of tagging and the statistical catch at age, which model is actually correct. And it seems, in my opinion, in my impression, it's a lot of people on the tagging committee believe we can estimate differences in magnitude in the models, tagging models, but whether the magnitude is correct, the relative difference in magnitudes, but whether the magnitudes are actually correct is another question. The M's, the natural mortality to come out of the tagging models actually appear to be much higher than we would expect, particularly out of Chesapeake Bay, right? Because some of those estimates are so large, you would, if they were correct, you wouldn't see any fish coming out of Chesapeake Bay. And because the models are estimating those high M's, you get a low F. So a lot of us don't really believe those are the true levels of F. So that's why in that slide I showed the total mortality, because they both are estimate the total mortality correctly, but it's when we split it up into M and F that becomes a problem.
But could natural mortality be higher than the SCA model is showing?
I mean, in Chesapeake Bay, I would believe that in Chesapeake Bay, and some of the resident stuff, it could be higher. On the coast, some of the models estimate a very low F prior to 97 when we assume that's when MICO started. And I don't really believe those, but then it estimates a higher M after that, and it's somewhere in between. But on average, the coastal programs, if I remember correctly, come out to average around 0.15 anyway, which is what we're assuming for 7 pluses in the statistical catch at age model. So we've gone back and forth with this, and these are the best scenario that we came up with, is the statistical catch at age and changing the M's during those early years, early ages.
Anything about the eggs?
We have looked at eggs. There's really not great studies been done. There's a few scant studies done on fecundity, and we did some, actually I did some work for the technical committee looking at what would happen if we used a fecundity age relationship that someone had developed from the 70s or something like that, and it didn't really change the results much. So, and because fecundity changes over time with age structure, at least the total fecundity, we didn't think we would use that, and because we don't have enough information what's happened over time.
Is that the presence-absence data from the Chesapeake about the striped bass eggs?
Ann Richards had done some work when she was at the Chesapeake Biological Labs, and I had those data, but they weren't sampled over the entire size ranges and stuff like that. Just hasn't been a lot done, and that's one of the recommendations that the SARC panel review also is to look at the fecundity and do some more studies. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess the question leads towards the we have a survey that's being done in the Maryland portion of the Chesapeake Bay by Jim Uphoff, which looks at just the presence-absence of the striped bass eggs. Well, not only striped bass, but in particular striped bass as well, which, and according to Jim's analysis, indicates that the SSB is stable. Well, the X biomass is stable. This was not reviewed by the TC. Maybe it is worth considering for inclusion in the assessment model in the future as an index or something. But at the moment it is not, and I would have to admit that there is always large variability or measurement error in terms of the X concentration or even presence absence, and it's being done only in the Maryland portion of the bay, but it's certainly an additional independent source of information which should not be discounted.
All right, thanks. Got Dave Simpson and Pat Augustine.
Yeah, thanks. Really comprehensive report and summary, and I learned a lot, and I have to now go back and study more to understand all the changes that happened and understand them. Most of my questions relate to recruitment and trying to think ahead to projecting what's to come. And I wondered about I don't know the history on the choice of the 1990 to I guess 2012 recruitment indices. Why that time period? Early in that time frame, you have fairly low recruitment, then a fairly sustained period of high recruitment, then it dropped in recent years. Last couple of years are high. So, if you went back further, you'd have more low numbers. But just what is the history on that? Is my first question.
Well, the TC discussed what range of years to use that would be representative of the sort of typical variability of recruitment given modern general climate conditions that drive the recruitment success. So, and when we discussed which time period to use, we didn't want to limit it to only the period when we had a series of strong year classes like 1993 and on. So we definitely, it's clearly, if we'll look at the history of past 2 decades, we had a period of very frequent strong year classes, 93 through 2003 roughly. We had several very strong year classes, and the most recent years were less successful. That is, we had mostly moderate to below average recruitment. So it was it's a judgment call essentially. There was no specific formal statistical analysis as to which ones to include. So collectively the group decided that 1990 through 2012 should be representative of the recruitment variability, and assuming that the climatic conditions would be similar in the next decade, and therefore we thought that it would be appropriate to draw from this range of recruitments that we had out of the model.
We also, and it's in the updated document, the one SARC review had asked us, well, what if we start at 1995 since that's the SSB? It basically gets the same answer. Yeah.
Okay, I would have thought, I mean, because if you, as Alexi said, if you don't include 90 through 94, those are all low recruitment years that I would think would, you know, if you don't include them, then you're going to project a higher expectation of recruitment off into the future. If you do include them, then there's more occasional low recruitments in your projections. And then I wondered about the impact of the variable M on the assessment and ability to project recruitment. Does it change that at all? Or that's a pretty profound change, but it's impressive that, as I interpret it, the old assessment that used constant M and the new one, the projections of biomass, those patterns don't seem to change all that much. I just wondered if you could discuss a little more about what you expected from that variable M and what you saw.
The variable M doesn't really impact the SSB much because, yeah, it's a scalar. And after, most of the SSB is like age 7 and older, and that's when M was constant, 0.15.
So, and I think you said that it's pretty much played out by the time you get into SSB, but I don't know, just intuitively think if you change M at age 1 from 0.15 to 1.1, you get a bigger reaction. But I understand what you're saying. And then just as an aside to think about it, I wonder how those much larger estimates of numbers at age early in the time series would affect the sort of parallel effort at ecosystem management and assessment, and whether there are many, many more mouths to feed now in that model, and what your thought is on that. I guess we don't really need to address that now, but I think the group will be interested later on, maybe through MSC or something like that. It just occurs to me. But to stay on the points here, you did some projections assuming status quo F and so forth. And in practical application terms, I'm wondering if it's possible to project what you would expect F to do if we kept at 28 and 2 fish. That assumes a lot of, interpretation of human behavior or projecting behavior, but is that possible to do? What would happen if we just hold measures constant?
Yep. Yeah, well, 2 of 28 is the general size limit for the coast, but each state has a different modification of that. If it's the same now, that's what we used, either the constant F of 0.2 would be the same, or the constant harvest of using the 2012 harvest over time would give you kind of the same thing. So,
okay, so you would expect if we kept the same rules that even though we're going through this little depression in stock size that won't change F. I would think the same rules, lower stock, might increase F, but your thought is that the F will change with the stock size, and the regulations won't impact that.
Well, there was the purpose of changing reference points on fishing mortality, where we said we need to find that level of fishing mortality that if we will maintain it constant, then long term on average it will keep us at the target SSB, and consequently the fishing mortality, the threshold fishing mortality would keep us on average at the threshold SSB. So our current F estimate in 2012 is 0.2, right, which is slightly below the threshold. So theoretically, if we'll stay at 0.2, if we were able to keep F at 0.2 long term, then long term our SSB would be hovering around the threshold, sometimes above, sometimes below, because we are still in the range of the spawning stock biomass, where we believe that the there is sufficient SSB for the successful reproduction, and primarily the strength of the year class will be defined by the environmental conditions, but not by the SSB size in itself. That is, we provided one condition, the sufficient number of exponents. Therefore, the success of the year classes, we're unable to predict this, what the weather patterns would be, but we're hoping that the general pattern will be the same. So if we'll keep at the f of 0.2, then our SSB will be varying in the future, but in the long term it would be equal to SSB of 90, or close to SSB of 1995. That was the whole idea. If we'll slightly lower fishery mortality and keep it constant at the target level, then theoretically we should be able to bring the SSB on average to the level of 1995.
Okay, I'm trying to remember between questions Paul asked, and can you flip to the fishing mortality estimates? So the stock is going up and then slowly declining, and then yeah, is the F1 available? I'm trying to figure out how we maintain such great consistency in striped bass regulations, and we wangle summer flounder all over the place every year, trying to maintain that constant F. And so we have a peak in fishing mortality when the abundance peaked. It actually increased, and then it dropped a little bit as the stock declined a little bit. And I guess I wondered if there was any ability to project not just F into the future, but sort of projecting that human behavior a little bit in response to stock size and what F will do if we don't change our measures.
Well, that is what is called management strategy evaluation, or MSC analysis, which it's a very comprehensive modeling exercise, but we need like economists or sociologists to join that, to be able to predict what humans will decide. It's technical committee currently is certainly not at that level yet.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks. What I'm going to do is I got 4 people on the list, and then I think we had a good discussion. This has gone through a comprehensive peer review process. I think it'll be a point in time that the board decides whether or not to act on it, because we need to have sufficient time to discuss a management response if we accept the stock assessment. So I got Pat, Rick Bellavance, Jim Gilmore, and Paul Diodati.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Lexi and Gary and Patrick. All very helpful, and the discussion has been extremely enlightening. I'd just like to reiterate one more time, or hear you reiterate one more time, the fast numbers that Mr. Diodati went through in terms of where we really were, so the listeners on the webinar and so on can hear where we really were. The number 22,000 metric ton was an approximation of where we were really in the SSB when we were at that lowest level we possibly could have been. If we continue with the constant mortality rate that we talked about for 2014 and didn't do anything between now and development management action plan, from the approximately 58 or 59,000 metric ton we're at now, where would you assume we would be throughout 2014 as we approach 2015? Maybe 56,000 metric ton. I'm trying to get some relative comparison here so folks realize that we really are going to address the issues, but the difference between the bad time, the 22,000 metric ton, and the reasonably good times right now, we have a very good cushion. So can you give us a comparison of those two numbers and just get it on the record so we can put that away?
I'm going to show you the projection again.
Read off the numbers. Someone should read off the numbers so the public, they can't see it. They can only hear it.
While we're waiting, everybody
Yes,
else.
that's the one. That's the
everybody else
one
on
right
our
there.
list, get their question really specific. Want to make sure we have enough time to enjoy the lunch outside today.
Yeah.
That's the one, Gary.
Okay. So it's expected, the projections suggest that SSB will decline, but under status quo, which is the purple here, it'll decline in 2014 just below the reference point, so like 54,000 metric tons or something.
54,000, okay. So we're comparing 54,000 to 20,000. Okay, and then as we go into 2015, if I see that correctly, there'll be still slightly a little blip there.
Right.
Maybe
right.
another 1,000 at best, and then we're going to see a very sharp increase, and it looks like 2016 we're well on our way to getting back up to the 60,000 metric ton on up beyond that by 2017. If I understand your chart.
Yeah, under status quo, there'll be a slight increase through 2017 of the SSB. And then the rest, the red and the blue here, is if a 20% reduction is taken in total harvest.
I appreciate that clarification on the record, and you hit it right. And I want to follow on question. One of our folks from New York passed me a note saying we shouldn't mix the coastal and producer fisheries for total dead discard because we're looking only to reduce coastal SSB. And Mr. Clark raised a question about what the impact was of mortality rate on the Chesapeake Bay to the overall number. And I think your response, Gary, was, well, the number is so large in the Chesapeake and variable that we had to combine them. I think that's what you said. Now, what does that do to the coastal? If you looked at the coastal SSB by itself, in terms of total discards, as opposed to the producer area, is that a significant number? Should we be concerned about it, or should we just say it is what it is? Can you help me on that?
The commercial discards or the rec discards?
I would probably say commercial at this point in time, yes.
I want to say that the SSB is the estimate of the female spawning stock that will actually go into the producer areas to spawn. So
I'd like that clarification. Can you expound upon that a little bit?
And I don't know if I don't quite understand what the rest of your question was.
Sorry, he just asked of what the effect would be on total discards when you add the producer area to the coastal SSB, and your answer is that's how you figured out it includes all of them.
It includes everything, yeah.
That's
the
perfect.
Total population.
Good.
SSB,
Thank you very much. That's all I have. And when you're ready, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make that motion.
Hoping we get there, Pat. I got Rick, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question, I guess, is kind of spatially in depth. Up and down the coast over the last 5 or 6 years, we've heard quite a few reports of large numbers of large striped bass being harvested illegally in the EEZ. The Office of Law Enforcement under NOAA and also the United States Coast Guard, I believe, made illegal fishing in the EEZ a priority for their 2012 and 2013 years. And as far as I understand it, we don't really have any fisheries-dependent data within that part of the range of the fish, and our fisheries-independent data that might capture some of those fish stopped in 2008 with when you stopped using the trawl surveys from NOAA. So I guess my question is, anecdotally, we've heard lots of stories of large numbers of big stripers out in the EEZ as commercial fishermen and a lot of charterboat fishermen see them and interact with them regularly. So my question to you is, how do those make it into the stock assessment, and is there a possibility that they don't? Like I'm trying to figure out how they get accounted for. Thanks.
If they're reported like the issue that happened in Maryland a couple of years ago, then they're included in the assessment. Otherwise, poaching is not included in the estimates for the model or in the model. We just don't have a good way of estimating poaching numbers.
Follow up to that? Yep. Okay. Taking out the illegal harvest, just the general idea that there's a large number of large females out in the EEZ. How would those fish, that pile of fish, make it through the assessment? I'm just trying to get an idea of where that would fit in.
I would say if we, unless someone's so stupid that they report to an interceptor on coast that they were fishing in the EEZ, they don't make it in any of the estimates. So they're not. That's one of the issues. We have some other issues too, like MRFs doesn't cover some of the major rivers, like the Hudson upriver of near the mouth or something like that. So there is some other information that we don't have for catches that occur in major rivers that aren't included too. So harvest is likely more than that we have estimated. What? Sorry.
But in terms of, when they come back to the rivers to spawn, they should show up in our spawning stock indices, which are different. So if they're out there I think your concern is that there's part of the population that we're not measuring somehow, and that we're not accounting for that biomass. Like, for example, what happens with red drum, where they move off the shore and we never see them again. But with striped bass, they come back to the spawning grounds to spawn. So they will be picked up in our spawning stock surveys.
Perfect, thanks.
All right. Jim Gilmore?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From what I've heard today and also the readings I've done, and I think Paul Diodati's questions before summarized it pretty well. I'm pretty well convinced we're at some point where we need to do some management action. But I wanted to follow up on Richie White's comments because I think I've gotten several hundred emails, and most of them are the doom and gloom emails about shutting fisheries down and collapse and all those other things. And I clearly don't think we're at that particular point. I think we've done a good job from the mid-'80s of putting together a management plan and built-in triggers, and we're hitting those triggers. So we need to take action so that we don't get back to the doom and gloom days. One other point, and I think people need to keep this in mind, is the other issue we've had in the Hudson is we've had 3 pretty poor years of juvenile abundance index, and that's one of the other triggers we had added in here. However, we have a bunch of density-independent issues that happened in the name of Irene, Lee, and Sandy the last 2 years also. So we have other things going on that are also driving some of these numbers down. So just need to keep that in mind. But again, I believe we are at the point where we need to initiate some action. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. We got Paul and then Kelly. I forgot that he asked me to speak, so we got 2 people, Paul and Kelly.
Right. I guess I'll just go back to it once more. The 22,000 tons was a point where we had collapse of the stock and the fishery, and so at 54,000 versus 22,000, that's not an attribute we want to. Not a redeeming quality for us when you consider that our limit is over 60,000 tons and we're at 54 in that projection. That's the number we have to deal with. We don't want to even think about the 22,000. And I guess when you Jim just mentioned it, we've hit some triggers. The current plan has 5 management triggers that balance both the SSB and the fishing mortality rates. 5. And when you consider these new reference points that have been very clearly presented, we've hit 3 of those triggers. If you go through it, we've hit 3. In fact, some of them are so desperate that the F threshold has been exceeded in 6 of the past 9 years that I just saw in the chart. And our SSB has fallen below target for at least the past 7 years. So when you consider the new reference points, that's what's going on. What's not clear to me, and it wasn't clear in your presentation, is that these new reference points are just for the migratory stock because the bay fisheries have kind of a separate but parallel management system with its quota-driven harvest program. We haven't talked much about that, but do these reference points they don't. It's my impression that they don't apply to the bay fisheries, and we don't know what those F rates are yet. I haven't heard what those F rates are. So are we going to see similar information for the bay fisheries, or is this proclam starting to separate in terms of how we're going to move forward? I guess that's my real question.
The reference rate we showed applied to the whole population, the combined stock population. And as Alexi mentioned earlier, if you guys accept the reference points, then we have to go back and recalculate the ones for the bay. So we don't have any for you today.
All right, thanks. Kelly?
Yeah, for Alexi and Gary and Mr. Jones, can you guys provide the PowerPoint that Rob O'Reilly alluded to a while ago from about 5 years ago, the conference on retrospective bias? Provide that to the board, because all those retrospective biases have confounded a lot of things that have been done here ever since the VPA was in use, and I think it would be illustrative for people to understand that. And my question for either of the three of you are, what are the common causal factors, in your opinion, that are causing these retrospective biases as far back as the VPA and now with the SCA? Are the causal factors the same? Can you identify some of those? And would it be the case that since the otolith versus scale-based aging is a known discrepancy, and it's also a commonality ever since the VPA and before, the discrepancy between scale and otolith-based aging, could that be one of the significant factors that results in these retrospective biases? Will we ever see one as severe as when we saw a 0.62 in the VPA when the target was 0.3 or 0.31? You could answer those and possibly provide the board with some more things like the PowerPoint Mr. O'Reilly alluded to. I think it would help a lot to understand not only the nature but the significance of what those biases mean.
I guess the staff could go to the NIMS website and try and get those. I'm not familiar with the PowerPoint presentation. I have the document, but as in terms, if I wish we knew what was causing the retrospective, because if that was the case, then we could try and correct it, but we don't really know what's causing it. It could be there's some catch we're missing, like I mentioned before, poaching. MRIP doesn't go up rivers where we know striped bass harvest is occurring. Delaware River, like Merrimack River in Massachusetts, we know there's harvest there, but MRIP doesn't go up that far to estimate. So it could be that. It could be our M's are up. It's just hard to say it.
It's more like inputs to the models, not the models themselves then, but the common causal factors or just simply the inputs, regardless of what model that you're using. Could it be the age and growth thing? I'm recognizing that can cut both ways, depending on what you're calculating. But why are we still using that input when we know it's erroneous on some levels? I'm sure there's a reason, I just don't understand why.
We're still using the catch because that's all we have. Scales versus, and we're working on that. I mean, there can be not so much the retrospective, but in terms of some of the estimates. It will change some of the estimates. And I did do some sensitivity runs looking at that in the document, and you can see there can be differences in the magnitudes of some of these estimates, whether we correct for the bias in the scales. But it's not great, and that's what was surprising. It really surprised me that it wasn't that great. We get increased variability in the recruitment estimates, so it reflects really what we're seeing in the young of the year index. If you don't correct for the bias, the recruitment kind of gets dampened a little bit. But there are some changes, but I was surprised when I did this exercise. It wasn't as great as I imagined it could be. So.
All right, thanks a lot, Gary. So I said after Kelly we would move on to board consideration of, I guess what we're looking for is consider acceptance of the benchmark stock assessment and peer review. Pat Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been a very interesting and informative debate we've had, and Gary, Alexi, and Patrick have done an outstanding job, and I, on behalf of myself and the rest of you, I hope we can say we appreciate it. I move that the board accept the striped bass stock assessment report and peer review report for management use as presented today.
Do we have a second? We got Paul Diodati as a second. We got moved to accept the benchmark stock assessment and peer review report for management use. Pat Augustine, seconded by Paul Diodati. Discussion on the motion? All right. I've got Rob.
This incorporates the reference points within that?
That's correct.
I would like to comment on a little bit of the discussion about the reference points. And, before Amendment 6, there was sort of a lobbying to even have the target F be 0.25. It ended up at 0.3. Now it's at 0.18. I think probably for the public's sake, they need to understand that the goalposts have changed a little bit. That has to be a clear message. It's not that management hasn't been moving ahead all along. So the idea that 3 of the triggers have been pulled is accurate with the new reference points, but it's really not reflective of the last several years. And I think that probably is something that needs to be part of the public information document, if approved.
Thanks, Rob. I agree. Any other comments on the motion? All right, all those in favor, please raise your right hand. You guys need a minute to caucus? I've got 30 seconds to caucus. You can thank Pat. All right, 30 seconds up. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. All those opposed, same sign. Any abstentions? No votes? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So we're going to move into agenda item 5 is to discuss a management response to the action we just have taken. Mike Wayne is going to provide a brief presentation just to try to provide some focus as to the next steps. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't take up too much time, but I just wanted to go through the fact that with accepting the benchmark stock assessment for management use comes new fishing mortality reference points. And to change the reference points, the board needs to consider an addendum through the adaptive management process to do that. So as was mentioned by several board members, we have reference points for the coastwide stock and then reference points for the producer area. Right now, the reference points for the coastal stock are ready to go, and the board would need to consider whether stock-specific reference points are still something that they want to manage with, and if so, the technical committee would need to be tasked to evaluate what those reference points would be. And so to give some sense for potential actions moving forward, one potential pathway would be essentially when does the board want to act on the assessment results? Do you want to take action in 2014 or do you want to take action in 2015? And the constant harvest projections were provided to help the board assess what the differences would be in the implementation dates. And so what I wanted to provide for context is that acting quickly in 2014, we have the reference points for the coastal stock, but it would take the TC a little bit of time to develop the producer areas. And so consider potentially splitting this out into 2 documents if that was a pathway the board wanted to go down, to act more quickly. So I think I just wanted to provide that perspective before we launch into the discussion of how to handle this, keeping in mind there will be some limitations, working with the technical committee, getting what those Chesapeake Bay and Roanoke River Albemarle Sound reference points would be, and potentially doing a management document on those producer areas separate from the coastal stock if you wanted to take different timelines with this. And then for the actual document process, this is the action timelines moving forward, is just as a reminder, it takes us essentially 2 meetings to approve an addendum. So you would approve, if initiated at this meeting, you would approve the document for public comment at the February 2014 meeting. We would have hearings in the spring and then bring back a final document for May of 2014. And then if you were going to split the documents like I had talked about as a potential pathway, you could then initiate a separate addendum through that process and have it be finalized later in 2014. So that's just a little perspective for moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I think it provides a good focus of how we want to act, whether or not we want to initiate something today, 14, or take some time to do it during 14 for 15, or a combination approach. Paul?
Yeah, I think now that we've accepted these reference points, so we've got to do an addendum to move to officialize that. And clearly, we are in a situation now, once we adopt these new reference points, we have pulled 3 of the 5 triggers over the past several years. And looking at that, you would surmise that we should have taken an action a few years ago, at least in 2012 or 13, and we haven't. So I think it's important that we expedite the process to begin actions to reduce fishing in 2014. I think that what I just heard is from Mike is a good way to expedite that. I think not only do we not have the information for the producer areas to have a parallel action, but I believe the producer areas, as well as the Roanoke Albemarle Sound fisheries, are probably getting set to begin relatively sooner than everyone else. And so I think it would be more appropriate to split off actions on those fisheries to begin in 2015. But I would support that. I would support separating the addendums. So we have one addendum starting right now to be implemented in 2014 that accepts the biological reference points and initiates actions in the coastal fisheries to be implemented in 2014. And those actions should be very simple and straightforward. And in order to save time, I would recommend a reduction in our recreational fisheries from the 28 and 2 to 28 and 1 fish, and whatever the equivalent reduction to commercial quotas is necessary to equal that. So that's what I would support. And then if states want to do other things, some states have seasons, others have different bag limits, they can accomplish that through conservation equivalency on their own. They can come in and propose something different that meets that biological target.
Thanks, Paul. And does Lexi or Gary know what % reduction reducing the coastal recreational career limit from 2 to 1 would yield?
Well, we could do that, but I know for Massachusetts I've already done this, and it reduces harvest total mortality by only 38%, because you got to remember, if you're not harvesting, the fish are being released, and there's mortality associated with catch and release. So it's not always a 50% reduction.
A hand up, Pat.
Point of information, Mr. Chairman. Didn't we have a motion tabled about reduction of .40 from last year that we carried over 2 years in a row? Well, I think 2 years in a row now. There's been an addendum put on the record, and we tabled it because we didn't have the stock assessment completed. And I'm not sure what we were going to address in that particular addendum, and I'm wondering if we could key off of that. In other words, untable it and then take Mr. Dizotti's advice and put it on that. But it also sounds like we're talking about two addendums or two separate ones rather than lumping them together, where we might run into difficulty and some folks are happy with the one part of it and not happy with the other part, and then the whole thing collapses. So your choice, Mr. Chairman.
Staff has advised me that we dealt with that motion at the last meeting, so we're got a clean slate to start from.
Good for that.
Got Rob O'Reilly, then Tom Fote.
Just want to comment on two things. One, the expectation from reducing the bag limit in Virginia. It's been about 5 or 6 years, but in the 35% from going from 2 to 1 fish without accounting for the discard mortality. So that, of course, would lower that a little bit. The other thing I wanted to do was to say that one or two addenda would be is not the big issue. The big issue is the simplicity that Paul talked about. I think part of the problem in the meeting in Boston was that everything leading up to that was very complicated. Those working on the proposals really never knew what the 40% or less reduction in F, how that would exactly be configured or dealt with. So the more straightforward, the better. And I agree that maybe seasons are an option as well. It's going to be up to the state plans. So I think we do need something that's really straightforward.
Thanks, Rob. Tom?
It seems I've been here over the years doing the same thing, looking at some figures for a period of time and decided we're going to do a drastic cut. All the ways to 2 years later, finding out that we didn't need to drastic cuts and how to change the regulations in New Jersey again. This is a real change in how we manage striped bass recreationally along the whole coast. This is not a minor change. It affects a lot of people's livelihoods. It affects a lot of people the way they do business. And it's going to have a huge impact on the recreational fishing industry up and down the coast. I think this is too big to just do an amendment or addendum. I think this is really an amendment process because we have changed what we basically passed in the when we opened the fishery was 2 fish at 18 inches and 2 fish at 28 inches along the coast. That's a major change that's been in place. A major regulation has been in place for 20 years, and we shouldn't jump to conclusions to change that regulation. It's one of the few databases that we have on stock assessment. I mean, we can't tell what happens with summer flounder with regulations since we change the regulations every year. We can't do the same thing with sea bass and a whole bunch of other species. This is the one species where we can have. And in my estimation, we've been here where the sky is falling and a whole bunch of people yammer. I mean, it was Maine sitting at the table for years yammering. They had a good year on striped bass. Whether fish come inshore or not depends on water temperature and what's the bait inshore a lot of times. And that's what affects, especially when we keep the EEZ closed. And we see the effects of that's happening. I mean, New Jersey at this time of year usually is at its temperature used to be in the high 40s, 51. We were still 60 degrees 2 weeks ago. I mean, we're still sitting in summer, and we've done that for the last 3 years. And last year was a total loss because the water was warm, and then we had sandy, so that closed all the beaches and most of the fishing down in New Jersey. So I'm really concerned to do this in such a fast-track method when it has such an impact on the people involved that basically harvest these fish and the industry that's there. We're not doing any social economic impact or what will happen going from 2 fish to 1 fish. And as I said, I look at these figures and I don't see the sky falling. I see that we're coming to where we have decided where a threshold will be, and then we're getting close to that line, but we're not under that line. It's not overfishing. Overfishing is not taking place. So people have been pushing for closing this or doing something, and it's the people that basically send the emails are the people that want to do that. the people that are out fishing a lot of times, which is the majority of the fishermen I go around talking to, they're not ready to jump through this type of hoop. So I really think we have some real concerns here.
Okay, I got Michelle, Pat, and Roy Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to echo a point that Rob O'Reilly made earlier with regard to tripping of management triggers, and I think just being really clear in the public information document that, you know, based on the previous reference points, we had not hit any of those triggers, but, you know, these new reference points, you know, have resulted in us tripping 3 of those triggers. And the other thing I wanted to do is just update the board again on the stock assessment update that we're doing in the Albemarle Roanoke whenever this body conducts a new assessment for the coastwide stock, that automatically triggers an update for the Albemarle Roanoke stock. And so obviously the technical committee is going to need to go back and calculate what those new reference points are going to be for the Chesapeake Bay. That it's currently an F target of 0.27, I believe, and that is also the same target that is applied to the Albemarle Roanoke. Just as an example, when we redid our stock assessment just 3 years ago, that produced a target F reference point that we used of 0.25, which is lower than the 0.27. So obviously we would be adopting for the Albemarle Roanoke whatever target biological reference points that the technical committee comes up with for the Chesapeake, but I did just want to let everyone know that we're in the process of updating that assessment. And we may end up with more conservative reference points than what the technical committee ends up with. So, thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Really good point. Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to just follow up a little bit on Paul Diodati. I think his comments regarding 2012 and potentially a missed opportunity to take action based on the information we've seen today is very appropriate. We continue to see dramatic declines in catch within the Northeast. I think it is time to take action at this time. The trends are very disturbing with this fishery. Mr. Fode's comment about Maine having a good year this year, I'm not sure if he fished there, but I did, and it was still below average compared to what it has been in years past. So I think if Paul is willing to take what he condensed in his last comment and put it into a motion, I'd be happy to second it.
Thanks, Pat. Got Roy Miller and then Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess Pat's comment may have answered my question, but the items that are on the board before us, it was my impression that we were creating a timeline for accepting the terms of reference, and yet at Paul's suggestion, we have sort of leapt one step beyond that to considering taking management actions to reduce the recreational creel limit based upon 3 of the 5 triggers having been pulled. So I'm not sure where we are at this point in time. Are we debating when to start an addendum to accept the terms of reference, or are we already gone beyond that and are now discussing specific management measures? So if someone can help me with that. Then plus I have another question, if I may, while I have the microphone, and that's regard to recruitment indices. Mr. Chairman, could you refresh my memory, or perhaps someone else? The management trigger for recruitment indices, that was a 3-year running average. So in order for that trigger to be pulled, there would have to be a subpar recruitment in 2014. And if that were to occur, that would be a 4th trigger being pulled. Am I right in my recollection of that? Thank you.
The JI trigger that was approved in Addendum 2, I think, was that if there was 3 consecutive years that fell below the 75th percentile, then it warranted management review. While we did have that in 2012, at least for Maryland, I think some other states, it fell below that threshold. This year, it is above the threshold, so it kind of resets the clock. So we're not in the position, at least for Maryland and Virginia, to be looking at a potential 3rd year of below the threshold in 2014. So it doesn't appear that we'll be, hitting that trigger at least in the next few years. In regards to your first question, Now, I think that's the discussion right now. We accepted the benchmark stock assessment, so we need an addendum to adopt that for management use. I think the other point in regards to the management response is trying to decide if we want to do something for 14 or 15. If the board wants to take management action in 14, we probably need to have an addendum that accepts the reference points for the coast and the management response. If the board decides to not take management action until 15, those actions could be separated. And the idea that was put on the table from Paul Diodati is that perhaps we initiate an addendum to adopt the coastal reference points with some management response to the coastal stock, task the technical committee to develop the reference points for the producer areas, and then bring that back to the board and then consider those reference points and a management response to those. So it'll be done through 2 separate addendums. To help clarify where we're at, so we're kind of like trying to decide, what's the next step. I got Doug, and then Bob, and then Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree based on our management plan, the time has come that we're going to need to take some action here. My personal perspective on this is that what we're trying to do is we're trying to make some adjustments so that we're close to the target, so that we're attaining the target fishing mortality rate that we have set. And I don't think, from my personal standpoint, that there's going to be a difference between 2014 and 2015 implementation of it, because in both cases we will be getting to heading back towards our target SSB, which is where we want to go. Both of them will start moving things up. The reason I think we should wait for 2000 to implement an action that will be in place by the beginning of 2015 is twofold. One, I want to get some clarity of what our real target is. I've heard this comment that now, because we have consistent retrospective pattern, that considering retrospective patterns are now in vogue. I would like to get clear information from the technical committee as to whether they feel, and the PDT, as to whether we should consider this in any management action we're taking. In the past, we weren't supposed to consider retrospective patterns. So I just want to make sure that we are all clear on what our target is right now. And it could be not considering the retrospective pattern. I just want to make sure this board is all together on what our target is. The second is that I believe that because we're managing this the striped bass stock as a whole, I think that both management actions for Chesapeake Bay and the coastal area should be moving together in the same management action. Whatever changes we're going to be making for the coast, we should have some comparable management action for the Chesapeake Bay State, because and North Carolina. They're the producer areas. That's where the initial fishing mortality on this stock is taking place, because they have lower size limits. And so I think it would be prudent for this board to take action at the same time on this. And so I would like to, I will be prepared to make a motion or a substitute motion, depending on which way we go, to try and have us initiate an action that would be going at the same pattern, same time frame.
Thanks, Doug. I got 2 more speakers, and then perhaps we can get a motion on the table to focus the discussion. Got Bob and Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all for a very informed and thoughtful discussion today. I've learned a lot. My sense as to where I think we should go is very similar to that just expressed by Mr. Grout. I like the idea of rolling together the reference points, both with regard to the coastal stock and the producer areas, together with a management review, if you will. I don't see the need for a rushed management response, but I do certainly see the need for a management review in accordance with the information generated from the stock assessment. And perhaps most importantly, I would want to see any action taken to be effective for the 2015 fishing year. I just think from a practical standpoint it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for a state like Rhode Island to implement new management measures for the 2014 season, given the time frames that we're looking at here. So I would support a motion that sounds very similar to the one that Mr. Grout was suggesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make that motion. I move that we go forward with a draft addendum to implement the new reference points effective January 1, 2014. And I'd like to hold a second motion, either Mr. Grout or Mr. Diotti, if they have a preference to make the second motion, that we would, let me get a second on that first, please.
Let's get down the screen, make sure we get it right first.
I'd like to have them separated. I'd like to have the reference points separated based on the benchmark, and then the second one stand alone, because there will be some options put in it, what specifically we'll do in terms of management, and I'd like to see that effective January 1 of 2015. So it may require a substitute motion by someone else.
All right, Pat, you okay with the wording that staff put on there? Move to develop an addendum to adopt the new biological reference points as determined by the 2013 benchmark assessment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's excellent.
All right, do we have a second to the motion? Got Lauren. All right, discussion on the motion. Doug?
Clarification, Pat, are you including new reference points for Chesapeake Bay in this motion? Which we don't have.
I'm hesitant because there is underway some other reassessment by Albemarle. Now, is that a standalone? Let's get some clarification on that before I say yes or no. If it includes the Chesapeake and the other, and it's appropriate to include them based on what our technical committee has told us, then I would say yes. If not, and I would like to get a response to find out if it's better to do it that way. I do not want to rush an assessment that's going on that's going to create a problem for several of our.
Yes, and just clarification, I meant for Chesapeake Bay and North Carolina. That's my question.
Mr. Chairman, can I get clarification from the states that are affected on the Albemarle and the other? If not, we'll just include it and then let them discuss whether they want to substitute that. So let's make it inclusive. Thank you, Mr. Grout. Make it inclusive with the Chesapeake and.
So can we add wording to that to make it clarify that this addendum would include reference points for both the coast as well as the producer areas?
As producer areas, unless there's absolute problems with that.
All right, Louis, you had your name up before your hand. Michelle, you had your hand up before the motion. You want to speak on behalf of the motion?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't have a problem with including the biological reference points for the producer areas. All I was saying is that we do our own assessment for the Albemarle Roanoke stock. And one thing I just wanted to clarify based on a comment that Doug made, the Albemarle Roanoke is not a producer area in the sense that the Chesapeake Bay is. I mean, our JAI is not included in the coastwide stock assessment at all. We have a very small percentage of outmigration. We've just had some recent work done on that. That's been accepted for publication. It's been peer-reviewed now, showing sort of a size dependency on outmigration. But I did just want to clarify that for the record. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, to that point, Mr. Chairman, that's fine. Then
Okay.
with the Chesapeake, we're all set.
All right, Rob, you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I share the idea that this can go forward. I just, and I think the technical committee understands this, we have a tag-based fishing mortality rate. That's for the Chesapeake Bay, and we have had a single value. I'm not really positive that it's been called a target. So when you talk about biological reference points, it's a little bit different in that since 1995, there's just been what's called a target fishing mortality rate. There hasn't been the same situation with a limit or threshold and a target, but I think the technical committee probably can do something there.
Thanks, Rob. I think, okay, Paul?
It seems to me that we've been rushing this decision since 2011. But, you know, given that, I'd like to make a substitute motion, which I don't think I'm going to have much support from the board, but I'll make it anyway. And it's to add to this motion the language that was on the screen a few minutes ago.
Can we try to work to get that on the screen?
It would start with N2, AND2. So it's all the existing language plus the supplemental language that was on the screen.
All right, I think the staff understands. Let's give them a second to put it on the screen for review, and then we'll see if there's a second for that. Just while we're waiting for that, so in regards to moving forward an addendum for the reference points, that action, if approved, would task the technical committee to develop the reference points, the stock-specific reference points for the producer areas. That would be brought back to the board in February under consideration of this addendum, then going off for public review. Okay. All right, Paul, you good with that language on there?
It doesn't include the language that was in Mr. Augustine's motion.
Okay, so what we need is this, it would be Pat's main motion substituted to include the management response for the coastal area.
And then add where it starts, and to implement.
I think all we need to do is take and to implement and add that to the original motion. And while we're waiting, Alexi, do you want to make a clarification in regards to the biological reference points for the producer areas?
Yes, I just want to reiterate what Mr. O'Reilly had mentioned earlier, that with respect to the Chesapeake Bay biological reference point, there is only one single reference point for the fishing mortality that has been historically developed, because unfortunately, we don't have an ability to produce an estimate of the spawning stock biomass, like with the statistical catch at H model. We do this coastwide. We were unable to methodologically to do this just for the Bay Area. For that reason, we have only F-based reference point, which was called the target reference point. So it is mine. I just want to get a clarification from the board that there is no expectation of the production of the SSB reference points, because that would be a challenge to the technical committee to do so, so that you know it now and not ask us how come that you didn't do this in 3 months from now.
Basically, it'll be the same as it is in Amendment 6 right now. Dennis?
I'm getting confused. I see this motion being changed and still being seconded by Mr. Augustine and Mr. Lustig. And I think I'm not sure where we're going, but we should have a substitute motion that was offered by Mr. Diodati and have a second to that.
We're cleaning that up right now.
Okay.
Okay, we're in the process of cleaning that up.
Okay.
We'll try to clarify where we're at here in a second. Not yet. We're trying to get it on the screen and make sure we capture it correctly. Dave?
So while we're working on that, I'm trying to get a sense of how big a reduction this might represent. And we heard from Gary that for Massachusetts, this would be about a 38% reduction in the recreational fishery harvest. And I guess you're more familiar. Would that be on the high end, do you think, of other states? Pretty high, fishing, really good fishing off of Massachusetts, so that would be the high end?
Probably the high end, yeah. It'll more likely be lower. If we do the bag limit analysis for each state, it'll probably be lower.
All right, Paul, what do you think of the language there? Good? Joe, you need me to read that? Move to substitute to develop an addendum to adopt the new biological reference points for the coastal fishery as determined by the 2013 benchmark assessment, as well as biological reference points for the Chesapeake Bay and Albemarle and Roanoke stocks, and to implement a 28-inch minimum size and one fish daily limit for coastal recreational fisheries with an equivalent reduction for coastal commercial quotas for implementation in 2014 made by Mr. Diodati. Do we have a second? Got Richie White for a second. This discussion on the motion, I had Tom, Pat.
I'm just trying to figure out what equivalency means, that we're talking about this being a 35% reduction or a 38% reduction in the recreational catch. Does that mean that is also corresponding to a 38% reduction in the commercial catch? So we're doing the equivalency, that's what I would assume that means. Just don't want to get that clarified. We might as well put that up, that it will be the same percentage reduction that we do in the recreational. Otherwise, the people will not look at this as being equal and equivalent.
All right, Pat, do you want to speak for or against the motion? I'm going to practice our parliamentary training procedures here.
I'm against it, sir.
Right,
If you'd like to have me talk now, I will.
Go ahead.
Okay. Problem I have with this is, do we know biologically, or not biologically, but do we know through our statistical folks there that 28 inches is going to do the job? Now, the reason I wanted it separated, because I was going to ask as a part of the options that the technical committee come forward with what percentage of reduction would that mean? Should we go to a 28 inch? How will that have an effect, and what will be the effect on our stocks? What if 28 isn't the right number? What if we should go to 27 or 26? If this is a moving management plan and a live management plan, we may want to go back and do that for 2 years or 3 years till we get 2 or 3 years of good production. And I see Alexei nodding his head yes. So to lock in now in one motion, where we have a complex motion that some folks are in favor of the top part, let's get that out of the way and then go to the second part. So I would move to divide the question, Mr. Chairman. I can do that by Robert's rules, can I, Mr. Abbott? Thank you, sir. Maybe you'll second it for me. So I would move to divide the question right where we were before, biological reference points to the Chesapeake Bay and Albemarle and Roanoke stocks, period. That would be motion one. Second motion would then be to start the next line, implement a 28-inch minimum size and one fish daily limit.
Hey, Pat, I may need a little help here from staff, but I think we need to determine whether or not the substitute motion will replace the main motion before we divide it.
Darn, I thought I could get away with it.
Unfortunately, you can divide a substitute motion.
Thank you, Mr. Beal.
So I think, if the board, the first vote is whether the board does or does not want to divide the question. And then you'll have subsequent votes on the reference points being included in an addendum. Then your next vote will be on the management being included in an addendum. All right, Pat. You want to make the motion, or you want to let the discussion continue on the substitute?
I want to make that motion to divide. Is that what you want me to do? I want to do that.
I want
to divide as I said. Divide the question, move the substitute, develop an addendum to adopt. I'm trying to read it there for the coastal and as well as, yes. So divide it at the point where we say Roanoke stock, period, and then stop there, drop out the word and to, or to implement, no, take out and to. And then it starts out, implement a 28-inch, that would be the second motion. And then we could deal with them separately, and I'll probably want to substitute that too, but that's another story.
Do we have a second to the motion? Yeah, Roy, you gonna second the motion? All right. So I guess where we're at is we're at a motion to divide the substitute motion. Joe, you're going to need me to read this, I'm sure. I'm going to be able to recite this in my sleep tonight. So the motion will be move to divide the question to address the biological reference points in the management measures in separate motions made by Pat Augustine, seconded by Roy Miller. Discussion on that motion. All right, let's vote on the motion. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. All those opposed, please raise your right hand. One. Thank you. Any abstentions? Null votes? One null vote. Motion fails. We go back to the substitute motion. What? Motion passes, I'm sorry. I tried. So staff is working to divide those two up so we can take those on one at a time. So just bear with us for a second. Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've been going along here. We were going quite well, and I was viewing where we were headed is with this whole management issue that we viewed striped bass management. We'd been heading down a highway, and we'd suddenly gone to the right-hand lane, and we veered into the breakdown lane, and we're making a decision of whether we want to go in the gutter or not. And I think that, you know, taking some action is essentially and hopefully will put us back on the right track. But what seems to have happened in the last 15 minutes is we got back on the road, and we're now in a Ferrari going 100 miles an hour. And I think it all went a little faster than what we would have liked. The first motion that was made, it's divided now, so we're going to deal with the two divided motions. And I think that it would have been easier to vote on the first motion that was offered and to have a decision on that, because I think it's way too early, in my opinion, to decide, in deference to Paul Diodati and others, that we need at this point, we need a one fish limit and a 28-inch size limit at this point in time, especially in the year 2014. To me, it's nearly an impossibility to achieve that. So I think the formation of an addendum is the right way to go. So I would, my vote would be to vote down the second part of the divided question, adopt the first question, and then from there decide in which direction we want to go and leave it at that today and move ahead. At least that's my thoughts.
Thanks, Dennis.
The board will need to vote on both of the divided questions, and then whatever passes from those two votes will become the main motion.
Thanks, Tony. So we move to substitute to develop an addendum to adopt the new biological reference points for the coastal fishery as determined by the 2013 benchmark assessment, as well as biological reference points for the Chesapeake Bay and Albemarle and Roanoke stocks. Discussion on that motion. I had a few people on my list from before, so let me just see if they want to go through that. I got Russell, I got you. So Dave, you want to comment on this motion? Okay. Russell, you want to speak for or against it?
For it.
Okay.
I'd just like to echo Dennis's comments. I thought they were very well put. I'm definitely for this part of the motion. Thank you.
Thanks. Doug, did you want to speak on behalf of this motion? For or against?
No, I'm for it. That's all I was.
Okay. And Dennis? Good. And I had Paul on my list from before. All right. Anybody else want to comment on the motion? All right. Give you guys 30 seconds to caucus. All right. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. All those opposed, like sign. Any abstentions? Null votes. Motion carries 15 in support, 0 opposition, 0 abstain, 0 null vote. Thank you. Now we're going to look at the second part of the divided question. This is to implement a 28-inch minimum size and 1 fish daily limit for coastal recreational fisheries with an equivalent reduction for coastal commercial quotas for implementation in 2014. Let's keep your hands up for a second, all right? Got Paul, Dave, John, Richie, and Doug. All right, Paul, for or against? Oh, I think I know.
I'm
Go ahead.
for. And I just want to clarify that in this motion, the equivalent reduction was meant to reflect the percentage decrease that's achieved by going from 2 fish to 1 in our coastal fisheries. So we've heard that there are estimates from 35 to 38%, but what I envision is that the technical committee would take a broad range of what their estimates are along the coast and take an average, and it's going to be somewhere between, it sounds like 30 and 40%. So that was the intent, and I think that's captured well enough on the record. As for a 28-inch fish as a minimum size and a creel limit, I mean, that's a well-founded principle that we've been living by in this fishery for about 18 years. So we know that works. That's not a new discovery or something that we haven't been dealing with. It doesn't mean that a state cannot do something different. You always have the opportunity to come in with a conservation equivalency. And I know that for some of us this might seem like a Ferrari-like action to take an action in 2014, but I'm a little bit disappointed that ASMFC through this board has not been able to move, and it won't move. It's going to be about 5 years, I expect, before this board takes any action to make a correction in management for the most important fisheries resource that we have before us. And that's an embarrassment. And I really, would encourage the board to think about that. It's not the messages that we all receive in our emails. It's the information that's in front of me, the information that I see in our fisheries when I'm out there on the water. It's clear what's going on. There's no mystery. We have more information about this resource and this fishery than any other fishery. And if you've been sitting at this table a while and haven't recognized these signals, maybe you shouldn't be sitting here. I don't know. I'm kind of wondering, if you can't see these signals, what can you see? So I'm in support of this.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for the clarification. Dave, you want to speak for or against?
Not so much for or against, but
Okay, go ahead.
thinking ahead to addenda, how we handle it, I would see this as sets the bound for range of alternatives. So there's status quo and there's one fish. I'd like to see something intermediate between the two. I don't know how to characterize that right now because I don't know what one fish does in terms of percent reduction in F, but I'm in favor of this provided we have the latitude for some intermediate level that might look like something like 2 fish over 28 but only 1 over 40, that sort of blend, because as my colleague said, you can't have 1.5 fish, Dave, but something in between like that just needs to be included in the addendum.
All right, Dave, thanks. John? Russell. Do you want to speak for or against?
Against.
All right, go ahead.
The reason I'm against this is I really like to hear the technical committee's input and options that they could set forth to move forward with this fishery. Just all of a sudden saying we're going to drop to a 1 fish daily limit is drastic, and I don't see that as the solve all problem. I think the board needs to hear a bunch of options that the technical committee puts together, and I think that's the process. And in deference to Paul, I'm not looking at 5 years down the road. I'm only looking at 14 months to have an implementation date by January 1, 2015. So I think I can wait that long, considering how long it takes New Jersey to get the process done anyway. We're not going to have anything done until probably midsummer anyway. So then it's only a 6-month wait from then. So I'm definitely against this, and I hope to see this shot down. Thank you.
All right, I got 4 more speakers. I have a reputation of ending meetings on time, and it's in jeopardy today. So let's try to make the point specific so we can get to a vote here soon. All right, I got Richie, Doug, Tom Fody, and Mitchell. Richie, for or against?
For.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Paul really said it all. We've been dealing with this for a number of years. It's always kicked the can down the road. We had the information. Let's wait to the benchmark stock assessment. Okay, we have the benchmark stock assessment, and it's telling us we need to take action and that we have been overfishing under the new terms of reference. When you talk about a lot of other options, my guess is that if this fails, which it looks like, that the options are very limited because other than going to 1 fish, your other options are going to be a season or increasing sizes. So, it seems clear to me that this is where we will end up, even though it looks like it's going to take us longer. And it looks like New Hampshire will not be voting as I would like it to vote, and I just want to make sure the constituents know where to send the emails. So, thank you.
Doug, are you for or against?
I have a motion to amend.
No, you can't.
Okay, go ahead. Oh.
My motion to amend is to add at the end and to include a, in the management action, equivalent reduction in the Chesapeake Bay quota that will be implemented in 2015.
Just trying to get clarification. We can allow the amendment to a substitute, to a divided question. We have a divided question to the main motion. Can we amend it at this point in time?
Technically, I don't think you can. I think it's cleaner to decide, up or down on this, on the second half of your divided question, and then, if there's changes that need to be made after that, it's probably better to do it on your next. Once you've kind of cleaned the table up a little bit, it's getting pretty messy right now.
Mr. Rule, how to word it right now?
It's fine. Could I speak to this motion?
Yes.
Then? So now that we're getting rid of the amendment, as I stated, I certainly appreciate the board's or Mr. Diodati and my my fellow commissioners here, decision to make wanting to make things happen quickly here, and I appreciate that. I also appreciate the intent here by Mr. Diodati to make things simple. But I do very strongly believe that we need to move forward in the same action, do this in a holistic manner. And so because at this point it's not included in there, I will encourage my other commissioner to vote against it with me. But at some point in the future, if this does pass, I would like to include some action in the Chesapeake Bay in the same addendum.
Paul?
I would
you want to respond to this?
Since that's still my motion, I think, even though it's been split, I would be willing to accept Mr. Grout's amendment as a friendly one and not require it. I can't do that.
I think we should try to deal with this divided question, get back to the main motion, and if people want to amend, we can do that. It's getting a little messy. Got Tom Fody. You want to speak for or against? All right, hold on. Michelle, for or against?
I'm in the Dave Simpson camp. I'm in the neutral, and I just wanted to echo his comments. So I think I would just like to see a greater range of alternatives. I mean, understanding what Richie has said, that there's probably not a whole lot of other places to go, but I think it would be important for the public to at least see what some of those other options are. I mean, obviously, reduction in season length is not going to be popular, but I think just for the public to see what those other options are. Thank you.
Thanks. Mitchell, you for or against?
I'm also in a little of both camp.
Go ahead.
So my comments would echo David's and Michelle's, that I do think there should be, the PDT should have the ability to put any appropriate recommendations into the addendum as it sees fit. And I have a particular question or concern, and of course I'm a little bit newer on this species, so someone might clear up what I'm missing. But as I understand the stock assessment, it's the spawning stock biomass coming too close to threshold that's driving our concerns. And if the technical folks tell us that the commercial harvest is not targeting the bigger fish, the spawning stock biomass, in the same proportion as the recreational fishery, would it really be appropriate, necessary, or fair to insist on an equivalent reduction if, in fact, that portion of the fishery is not imposing as much impact? Perhaps I'm missing something, but it is a concern that it just seems like it would be unfair to say the commercial reduction has to be the equivalent, just as a matter of public relations. I mean, is that going to serve a scientific purpose, would be my question.
Thanks. Tom?
To answer Mitch's, The commercial fishery on the coast is the same size, has to be 28 inches or larger, so you're targeting the same type of fish. And in some states, it's a hook and line fishery, and it's a bigger, it's a big fish fishery. Okay, on the ground. What I'm looking at, you know, and I understand Paul's trying to prove his points and try to move things, but to say some of the things I find a little annoying, or I think presumes a lot of us. This is a stock that's not being overfished. Overfishing is not taking place. It was federal, you know, I look at the federal plans, and we look at scub, and we look at black sea bass, and we look at the, and we have stocks that are not being overfished, and overfishing is not taking place. Yet we're going to do reductions as we go along through this process on them. And the next, you know, as we looked at scub, what happened at the Mid-Atlantic Council meeting. This is a stock that is producing, and we've made an estimate what we want to have the spawning stock biomass. This is a stock that's not collapsing. Stocks is not going to be any different. And some of us have been got around this table 30 years ago because we cared about striped bass. It was one of the driving forces that got us involved. So we're not going to do anything that's going to hurt the stock. What we are looking at is what is the necessary knee-jerk reactions that we've taken over the years just to come back 2 years later and redo it. I can remember being forced to put a slot fish in limit in New Jersey because we basically, the board forced us to do it. And I do it by legislation. And 2 years ago later, telling my legislature, making them having a special meeting to change that, because then the commission says, well, it wasn't necessary for you to do a slot limit. We want you back at 2 or 28 inches. No, those are knee-jerk reactions that has consequences in the way people respect us and people look at us. And again, that's what I'm looking at, because I know 2 or 3 years down the road when we do another retrospective analysis, these figures are going to be different than what they are now. And that's where I'm concerned. So that's why I'm saying I don't want this Ferrari. I want to take it slow and easy. If we're going to do a major change in a species that we've been fishing the same for 20 years without overfishing and without being overfished.
All right, thanks. Got 3 people on the list: Dennis, Rob, and Roy. If you know, please, if something's already been stated, it doesn't need to be stated again. Just try to keep your comment on a new concern or comment. Rob?
Yeah, I just want to talk about 2015, and to me that's the way to go about this. The complaint in 2011 from the PDT was that the board had not given the PDT really very good direction. No one, again, seemed to understand what the reductions in F, how they could be configured, how that could be done. There was some talk of maybe looking at changes in maximum spawning potential, and I think all of that imploded, the whole event. I think that was certainly part of it. And now this motion, the divided motion part here, is simplistic, but we still haven't heard what the impact is. I heard Dave Simpson ask a couple of times, what does the technical committee think is the reduction that's required? It seems like we need to know that information. What's required? What will help out here? And secondly, what are the mechanisms that can be accomplished? How's the technical committee going to recommend that we go about this? And I don't see that right now.
All right, thanks, Rob. Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom, I hope that you conclude this meeting at 12:15, as I'm beginning a meeting at 12:15 with lunch included for the LGAs.
Help me out here then.
I will. But seriously, and my choice of using the Ferrari was obviously pointed at Mr. Diodati, a good Italian car. I think that and again, I agreed with most things that Paul Diodati said, because I agree with him. And if you asked me as an individual what I wanted, I would probably go along with this. But I think that we're in a political arena here, and that we're trying to make sausage, and that's what politics is all about. It's about what is achievable at this time, and I don't feel that achieving a result by 2014 is possible. What I think we need to do is either vote this up or down and then offer a reasonable new motion, which to me would be something along the lines of implementing an addendum to achieve what it is that the technical committee has shown us where we should go. I can't come up with the exact words, but we really need to set the groundwork to have an addendum and give ourselves the opportunity to work through that and have it implemented by the year 2015. So I thank you for your indulgence.
Thanks, Dennis. We're going to last speaker, then we're going to call the question. Roy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I need a clarification before I can vote on this particular motion, and that is specifically with regard, if I could request of the maker of the motion, did he intend, as Amendment 6 does, to lump Delaware River and Delaware Bay into coastal fisheries, or my memory goes back to prior to Amendment 6 when Delaware River and Delaware Bay were part of the producer area? So which is it for the purposes of this motion? Thank you.
Go ahead, Paul.
I wouldn't use this motion to change the way we've been managing the fisheries since we've implemented the current amendment. So however your fishery and your geographic area is defined in the current amendment, it would remain under that definition. I wouldn't pose to change that. That would be a different game.
I see your hand in the audience. We're still trying to get back to a main motion, so I'm not going to call upon you right now, and probably are not going to be able to call on the public, recognizing that if the board moves forward, this is just initiating an addendum. It's going to come back in February, which will be other opportunities for the public to comment. And I apologize for that, but it's based upon the time constraints that are upon us today. I would encourage you to follow up with board members after the meeting if you have a concern that has not been raised. So we're going to call the question here. 30-second to caucus. All right, let's take the vote here. And depending on how this vote turns out, we're going to go back and vote on the main motion of the divided question. Joe, you good with the motion on the screen? Okay. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. All those opposed, please raise your right hand. Thank you. Abstentions? No votes? Did you have 2-12? Motion fails 2-12. 0-0. So now we're going to go to the main motion. We can get that on the screen, which was the first part of this divided question. Joe, do you need me to read that? Should have it memorized by now, but I'm going to wait. All right. Main motion, develop an addendum to adopt the new biological reference points for the coastal fishery as determined by the 2013 benchmark assessment, as well as biological reference points for the Chesapeake Bay and Albemarle and Roanoke stocks. Discussion on the motion. Michelle.
Just a clarification, it's not two separate stocks for the Albemarle and Roanoke, it's one stock, so it should read Albemarle/Roanoke.
Make that clarification without any objection. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm certainly supportive of this motion. I would also be supportive of either an additional motion or a substitute motion that would add to this language along the following lines: combined with a range of management options to address fishing mortality reductions for implementation in 2015. I don't know about parliamentary procedures in terms of whether we want to deal with this first and that issue second, or whether a substitute motion would be in order at this time, but those are my sentiments. Thank you.
Well, it's the board's preference, but I think it would be more efficient if we could deal with this motion and then discuss if there's additional action the board wants to consider. Okay, Bob? All right. Doug?
Just another potential clarification for the motion based on what Alexi's comments were about this, that maybe when it says as well as F biological reference points, fishing mortality biological reference points, just to make it clear that we're not talking about SSB for Chesapeake Bay and Albemarle, Roanoke.
Can we put that in parentheses, perhaps? Lauren?
Although it's somewhat confusing, the tremendous amount of dialogue we've had, I believe this is indeed Pat Augustine's motion, which I seconded, and perhaps for the record, you would like to include that information.
Doesn't matter at this point, I guess, but it's on the record. Joe, do you need me to read it? All right, then we're going to call the question, guys, all right? Main motion, develop an addendum to adopt the new biological reference points for the coastal fishery as determined by the 2013 benchmark assessment, as well as biological reference points, in parentheses, fish and mortality, for the Chesapeake Bay and Albemarle Roanoke stock. All right, 30 seconds to caucus. I don't see anybody talking. Let's call the question. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. All those opposed, please raise your right hand. Any abstentions? Null votes? Motion carries 15-0-0-0. Thank you. Go ahead, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unless Mr. Grout would like to make the motion, he talked about, I move that the board initiate an addendum directing the technical committee to develop a range of management measures to reduce fishing mortality to meet the recommended target reduction. And I'm not sure target reduction are the right words, but if you want to help me wordsmith that one, I'd appreciate it. But the essence is we want them to come forward with a range of options, whether it includes the one at 28 or whether it's 24, 26. But leave it up to the technical committee to give us a broad range. And I could qualify it by saying 5 options because we don't want more than 15 or 20, and we can talk about that later. But the essence is to develop that range. That's my motion, Mr. Chairman.
So if I get it, so the concept as they're writing it is to task the staff and technical committee to begin developing options that will bring the fishery back to the fish and mortality target.
Yes, to be implemented in 2015 if you want to add that. So we now have closed the loop, January 1st of 2015.
And the date would be by January to be implemented in 2015.
To be implemented by January 15th of 2015 because by January 1st because that will close the loop as far as the public is concerned. We are taking specific action.
And Pat, just one other question for clarity. It was your intention that the reduction would be to reduce the fishery to the target level to be achieved in 2015 or over a period of years?
The real concern is whether or not it's conceivable to spread it out over a group of years. My concern there is if we do, and I'd like to hear from the other members before I give a yes or no, we do not want to kick the can down the road. We want to make sure that we're going to be able to bring this back to that level we want it. So I would say no in 2015 and then let the public come back and say it's not doable or commissioners around the table say it's not doable.
All right, so we got a motion, move to initiate an addendum to develop a range of management measures that reduces fish and mortality to meet the fish and mortality target implemented in January 2015 made by Pat Augustine. Do we have a second?
That's my motion, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Target.
The target.
You got Dennis Abbott for a second. Richie.
I'd ask the maker of the motion if he would add at least reduce fishing mortality to at least the target, so there might be something in there that might be a little more conservative.
Please add that. Thank you.
Rob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would ask the technical representatives if that addresses some of the concerns of the past about reducing fishing mortality rates in areas with different size limits regimes and different effects. That is it more that the measures to achieve the fishing mortality target, so it might be harvest rate, annual harvest rate, it might be the exploitation rate. Is that something that the technical committee is comfortable with?
They're shaking their head yes. On the other comments on the motion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, is that implicit in our request? Is that implicit to the technical committee, what Rob O'Reilly said?
I think so,
That'll
yep.
be, okay, thank you.
And John?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My only comment was, if you're talking about the target now, you're saying that we have to go at least to the target, not so we have to go below the threshold, down to the target, and even below the target mortality. That's what we're shooting for in this addendum.
This motion is to get at least the target. Got John. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Bill Edler. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is the intent here for two separate addendums to be delivered to us in February? One, which was the first one that passed, and the second one is this one. Is that the intent here? So we're going to be looking at two different addendums to approve to go out to public hearing after the February meeting. Is that what I'm understanding here?
Yeah, I see it being two separate addendums. Whether or not we can get this addendum ready to go out to public comment after the February meeting is I think it's going to be pretty ambitious, but it would at least bring something back to the board to fine tune and maybe, if not February and May. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Adler actually asked the question I was going to ask. I would prefer to have the two actions rolled together. I think it serves the public better to have just one addendum to focus on addressing both issues, but I understand your point, and I think it's well taken. I think we can deal with that issue at the February meeting. I would just lastly note that I think the addition of the words "at least" make me less supportive of this motion. I don't think they're necessary, and I think it pushes us farther than where we need to go. But generally, I like the motion with the caveat that the addition of those words "at least" I think are unnecessary. Thank you.
All right, I got David Borden, Paul, and Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume it's the intent here, this is just for the record, I assume that the intent is to implement this in all areas on January 1st, 2015. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's yet to be determined, but I think that's the kind of focus, that this will include coastal areas and producer areas, and the board will review the options that the technical committee provides.
Thank you.
Paul?
We talked about the existing management triggers in our current amendment. There are the 5. And in several of them, they were very similar. There's similar language. I want to make sure that this language doesn't contradict with that in the amendment, unless we really want it to change, because the original language, for instance, says the board must adjust the striped bass management program to reduce the fishing mortality rate to a level that is at or below the target within 1 year if the fishing mortality threshold is exceeded in any year. So you want to, I think, be consistent with that amendment language. And we've done that for 6 of the 9 years if we accept the biological reference points.
Yeah, so I think we're consistent.
Okay.
Yeah. Doug?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do support this motion. I think it's a holistic and prudent way to go. I think it will make things cleaner. I do also continue to support Mr. Diodati's concept that we make the options, we limit the number of options that each sector has, so that we don't get wrapped up like we did before with having so many options that it was so confusing that we didn't do anything. I want to make sure we have some very I would like to encourage the board to direct the PDT to develop something with a relatively small number of options for each sector, the recreational, commercial base, and Chesapeake Bay and Albemarle Roanoke Sound management measures. Thank you.
All right, let's call the question. 30-second caucus. Sure. Move to initiate an addendum to develop a range of management measures that reduces fishing mortality to at least the fishing mortality target with implementation in January 2015. Motion by Mr. Augustine, seconded by Mr. Abbott. All right, let's go. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Thank you. All those opposed? Thank you. Any abstentions? No votes. Motion carries 14-1 to 0-0. Thank you. All right. So given the time constraints before us today, we're going to skip the FMP review. If you have any questions, is there any objection with doing that? If there's any questions, follow up myself or staff. And any other business that the board wants to bring up? All right, just before we adjourn, I think we all owe gratitude to the folks that were involved with the stock assessment and peer review, particularly Gary Shepard, who has chaired, Gary Nelson, I'm sorry, Gil Nelson, who has, as my staff will tell you, I'm not great with names at times, who has chaired the last two benchmark stock assessments. And with that, staff has a little gift for Gary. Well, thank you very much, Gary, and meeting adjourned.
For the legislators and governors appointee, their lunch meeting will be in this room, and lunch will be brought in a few minutes.